the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and good afternoon. This is Alex Phillips sitting in for Ian Collins. I'm going to be with you for the next 3 hours until 4 o'clock. This is the first time I've covered this particular show, and listen to the music. That's nice, isn't it? Oh yeah, I feel like I'm sort of like in like some sort of club in Ibiza, having a cocktail, the sun's setting, we're about to go down the newspapers, because that's what people do when they go on holiday in Ibiza, or at least maybe it's what the Camerons do, and they've got their private photographer there, ready to snap all of those romantic moments. Anyway, I digress, because it's not going to be a very romantic show, because we are going to be talking about news and sharing views, and, well, being pretty horrified by some of the things bouncing around the walls of current affairs today as we kick off a new week. We're going to be talking about the fact that, well, the Labour Party are going to have to stick their hands even deeper in your pockets. They're going to have to destroy the economy even more under the guise of trying to save it. This is after it was suggested that they're going to explore a wealth tax. The simple sixth form solution, isn't it? All those people with loads of money, just tax them. Tax them. Oh, magic grandpa Jeremy Corbyn, he loves that idea, doesn't he? Let's just go after all the millionaires, take their money and redistribute it among people who can't be bothered working. The problem is, though, is that the millionaires would just ship out and leave, and that's what they've been doing already. And as I was just discussing with Julia Hartley-Brewer there, what is going on with grooming gangs in London? It's funny that they seem to have taken over most other big cities and industrial towns, but in London, oh no, nothing to see here, according to Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who also doubles up as the Police and Crime Commissioner. We're going to be going back over a particular Q&A session in mayoral question time, and look at what he says and how he speaks to people asking him about grooming gangs in London. And ask yourself, why is this man still in a job? It's disgusting. Also, it is, of course, the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings, and we're going to be talking about, has much really changed? Where is that terror threat? I remember in the aftermath of those attacks, and for many years when we all spoke about having different traffic light systems for the terrorism alert, how precarious the situation in the United Kingdom was. Well, we don't seem to hear that anymore, do we? So has everything suddenly gotten better? Have the terrorists all been dealt with? Is everybody so fully integrated that no one is plotting against the West anymore in the United Kingdom? I would imagine not. Right, there you go. There's a little taster of what's going to be coming up on the smorgasbord of common sense. If you want to add a sandwich to the picnic basket, or a bit of cheese to the buffet, maybe a slice of meat to the charcuterie of news, then this is where you dole out your delicacy. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. That is your normal network rate, so it doesn't cost you any more than phoning up for a takeaway. 8722 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message instead. If you are going to send a text message, because it is so old school, it needs guiding to where it needs to be. It started to forget how to go about things because it's been replaced by WhatsApp. So you've got to send the word talk before you write your message. Otherwise, poor old text is going to get a little bit lost and be found down the shops thinking it's 1948. If you'd rather talk to me on X, our handle is @talkTV. And if you are a youngster, a millennial, or perhaps you're just on the pulse boomer, you can use WhatsApp, which is the same as the phone number, 0344 499 1000, and you can leave me a little voice note by pressing the microphone, recording what you have to say, and pinging that over. And as long as they're sane, we'll play them out on air. I can't wait, because all of you are sane. You're all lovely, delightful, discerning patriots who basically are probably the most sensible people on planet Earth, because you know that you are already at the home of common sense, because this is Talk. Alrighty then, let's kick off and chew over the big political stories of today. I'm joined by Simon Danchuk, who is a former Labour Party MP, now a Reform UK member, and indeed former Reform UK candidate in the previous Rochdale by-election. Good afternoon to you, Simon. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's good to be with you, Alex.
Oh, it's always great to have you on board now. When you look at the pretty bad state of our economy, the flight of capital, when you kind of realise, for those who understand the jargon of economists, that we've pretty much hit the top of that Laffer curve, and that all the taxation being applied by this government and previous governments is making actual capital flee our shores. People go, well, what's the point in being in the UK or doing business here? We're just taxed to smithereens. It seems to me a fairly ridiculous idea to be reaching into the grab bag of leftism, as Lord Kinnock appears to be doing, and suggesting that how about we just tax people whose assets are worth more than 10 million quid. A 2% tax on that could create £10 billion a year for the Treasury. Well, that's all very well, but I have a feeling people who have assets of more than £10 million also probably have very adept wealth managers and funds where they can move that money around and therefore not be taxed anything. That's the point, isn't it? It won't work.
Well, it certainly won't work. There's no doubt about that. And what we've seen with the Chancellor's non-dom taxation, we've seen people with wealth fleeing the United Kingdom, going to Dubai and elsewhere. And this isn't anecdotal, though I do know people who've left the country for these sorts of reasons. It is fact, and there's been information circulating over the weekend that shows people are fleeing Britain more than any other country to avoid the sort of taxes that Rachel Reeves is trying to apply. And, you know, well, some people might say, so what does it matter? Well, they make up a big take of taxation. You know, they pay for public services. And so she's effectively creating a very large black hole that needs to be filled. And then on the back of that, we see at the weekend, Lord Neil Kinnock adding in his two penneth, let's tax the rich even more, let's introduce a wealth tax. All the trade unions are in support of it as well. This is a return to the Labour Party's 1980s politics of envy and so-called equality. I mean, it just does not work. And we're going to be in a worse financial position as a country if they get away with this, if they implement something like a wealth tax. It's disastrous.
I know, I agree. Shall we have a listen to that old fossil of Labour Party past and what he had to say about a wealth tax? Let's roll the clip.
So two things. You think that when Rachel Reeves comes to present her budget in the autumn, number one, she should contemplate tax rises. And secondly, you would say tax rises on wealth and assets.
Yes, I would, because I think they should stick to the fiscal rules they've established as a way of strong reassurance about their commitment. It's very, very, very important, not just for the public, but for the markets too, and indeed for their own self-confidence, which is very important.
I wonder how much the Kinnock family wealth is worth. I mean, look, maybe he's a philanthropist who's given all of his gains to charities. His son is married to, I think it's the former Prime Minister of a Scandinavian country, I forget which. But, you know, you wonder with these people, when it comes to rest on them and whether they send their kids to private schools, whether their sort of leafy five-storey house in Islington should also be subject to this tax, or whether they would probably sneak it into some sort of system where it is in a loophole. I mean, but this is the thing. As lovely as it sounds to a 6-year-old or someone who's read the, you know, narrative of Robin Hood and thinks that the wealthy should be gotten after to pay for the poor, well, it's like a fairy tale, isn't it? But the problem, that's exactly what it is. The Brothers Grimm could write it, and the outcome is indeed pretty grim. And you're right to bring up the fact, Simon, that there's been some data on this. It's actually Henley and Partners who've created a wealth migration report saying that, get this, 16,500 millionaires will leave the United Kingdom this year alone. 16,500 millionaires. So that's basically, oh, I don't know how much, a huge chunk out of the taxpayer portion that goes into the Treasury that's no longer going to happen. I mean, it's just the difficulty, though, and I want to ask your view on this, is it turns out that some of Labour's biggest union paymasters, they're the ones who sort of pull the strings, including Angela Rayner's former employer Unison, have actually backed this call, and that they're going to be raising the idea with the Prime Minister and lobbying Labour MPs. Now, just like the Conservative Party, often accused of being in the pockets of big business, the Labour Party, often when the unions come a-calling, especially Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana setting up their own fruit and nut party, I have a feeling Starmer might be quite spooked by this. Do you think he could cave?
Oh, I think he could cave. I mean, talking about the Kinnocks, they've done very well from the public purse over the years, going on to be EU commissioners, both Neil and Glynis, wife. And as you mentioned, Stephen Kinnock's doing all right for himself. I mean, they've done really well financially from the public purse over the years, no doubt about that. But in terms of the point that you make there, in terms of Starmer, the problem we have as a country now is that he's being held to ransom by his own backbench Labour MPs. We saw this over the disability benefits proposals. He had to cave in on that. That's created, I think it's a £4.5 billion black hole that Rachel Reeves now has to find the money for. Whatever's now going to be suggested by the leadership of the government and of the Labour Party, by Starmer and Reeves, is going to be challenged by Labour MPs. And so you will have Labour MPs calling for a wealth tax and pushing for this to go forward. And that's a real concern, not least, not for the millionaires, but for the economy. Because if the wealthy people continue to leave, if they continue to avoid paying the taxes, we have less tax take to pay for public services. Right. And it becomes a spiral of descent into significant problems.
Yeah, people want to know why Switzerland is so well heeled. It's because a lot of people manage to squirrel their money away there without much hardship. Let's talk now, because you mentioned sort of welfare reforms. Apparently, the welfare Mark II difficulty that Starmer could land himself in, the quagmire of revolt, is going to be down to reforms of special needs education, special educational needs, should I say, provisions for that, where that is apparently going to be reformed and will focus on early intervention, improving provision for support in mainstream schools rather than forking out for much more expensive specialist schools. Now, it's not particularly an area that I know a great deal about, but apparently figures last month showed 639,000 children in England were being given financial support from local authorities in order to help with either the right to education in a special school, the access to a dedicated teaching assistant, or in fact even paid transportation getting them to and from school. And that the special needs budget will be around £12 billion, up from £8 billion around 5 years ago. Certainly, we have to be looking into why this budget has gone up by £4 billion, up by 50% in just 4 years. But it's a delicate topic, isn't it, Simon?
It's a very emotional topic, and any member of parliament, I was an MP for a number of years, you will have parents coming to you making representations for their child who has special educational needs and or a disability. But what we've seen in recent times is more specialist schools being established as opposed to providing education in mainstream schools for children like this. And there's a big debate about that. But the Education Secretary wants to move away from specialist schools back into mainstream schools. And there is a good, strong argument for that in terms of the children themselves. But and it might sound callous, but you can't give parents everything and anything that they want for their child. We can't as a country afford, as you point out, to increase spending over a couple of years from £8 billion to £12 billion. So we have to have a more sophisticated system of identifying what should be spent on which child. And that's what I think she's trying to do. But I think it's the Times newspaper today points out, this is going to be another rebellion within the Parliamentary Labour Party. There are Labour MPs saying that they don't want the changes that Phillips is proposing.
There's some pretty big question marks over the way that welfare is conducted in this country, without a doubt. I mean, I can't get over this sort of mobility scheme where people are given cars for having anxiety and things like that. That's something that needs looking at. And I remember, because things when you're a journalist stick in your head like a fly stuck to a piece of flypaper, which is when there was all the controversy about councils, local authorities being put in special measures because they were going bankrupt. And in some of them, the transportation of just one child to school via a taxi due to having special educational needs was costing authorities upwards of £1 million a year. And you have to think, well, how on earth can it cost that amount to ferry ferry a child to school. But a very delicate subject indeed. And I think also someone needs to get on top of why there's such a huge uptick in diagnoses of things such as ADHD. Let's focus now on the fact that it is the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings. A dreadful day. I remember it very well. In the period, in the aftermath of the 7/7 bombings of 9/11, and during that whole period, while you had a load of people fleeing over to Syria to join ISIS, we were constantly being updated on a traffic light system basis of what our terrorism alert was, you know, whether it was an amber, whether it was green, whether it was red. We don't tend to hear of that anymore, but something suggests to me, particularly given the fact we've got a load of undocumented men from the Middle East flowing into Britain, given that we know that IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates freely on our streets, given all of these pro-Palestine marches and the prescription of Palestine action, I would be staggered if the terror threat had reduced since 7/7. I would imagine it's probably higher than it's ever been.
Yeah, I were reading the testimony of somebody who managed to survive 7/7. They were at Edgware Road tube station when one of the blasts went off. I mean, it's exceptionally tragic. I actually think we don't do enough to remember that day, actually. Just because it's 20 years and it's a particular number, we're remembering it today. But over the years, I think we've decided to forget, and I think that's a big mistake. So I think we should remember those that died. You know, in New York, they remember.
Do you think, I'm going to suggest something, Simon, do you think that there's been a almost deliberate effort to forget or to minimise what happened 20 years ago for fear of it creating further social tension? Or do you think that's me being especially cynical?
No, I think there would be some truth in that. I think government and agencies are very sophisticated about not wanting to remind us who committed these types of crimes. I actually think we're very lucky in that something similar hasn't happened. And when I say lucky, I think we've got an exceptionally impressive intelligence service in Britain that we underestimate, actually. And they keep us safe on a day-to-day basis. But it only takes one or two incidents or occasions when somebody gets through the net, and we know where that threat will come from. If we're totally honest about it, it's from residents in the UK who are Muslim. I mean, that's where the threat tends to come from, and that's where it came from in this instance. And I think we should examine these issues more closely so that we are more aware of them, so that we talk about it and we are more alert to the threat. I think that's a positive, but it's not what we've been doing over the last 20 years, I'm sorry to say.
No, indeed. We're going to be talking about this throughout the course of the show. We're going to be speaking a bit later on to Dr. Alan Mendoza about where the terror threats might be today, because his think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, monitors this stuff extremely closely, so he'll give us a very clear picture of where he stands, and that's in connection as well with the revelation that the security service had said to the Labour Party to prescribe Palestine action back in March. The threshold had been reached back in March, but the Labour Party didn't want to do it ahead of the local elections. That doesn't surprise me at all. Before we go to break, we're keeping hold of Simon, so don't go anywhere, Simon, and don't you go anywhere either back at home. Let's read some of your messages. Now, we were, of course, talking about Neil Kinnock. The Kinnocks, who both ended up as EU commissioners, and I know how much those characters are paid with the perks and the pensions. And also his son Stephen Kinnock, is married to a former... I need to figure out who that was. He is married to a former Prime Minister of a Scandinavian country. I think it might be Denmark. I know that someone in the gallery there is going to be researching that for me as I speak. But Glyn in Rotherham has said, I bet Neil, get this, is worth 9.5 million. Have a great show, of course, because Neil is talking about taxing people who are worth over 10 million. I pay around £36,000 a year in tax. I just received a notification that I owe another 2,500, and they're taking it out of my salary this year and next. Is absolutely disgusting, and I see very little for it but a grimmer and grimmer outlook. I feel so angry. And finally, let's read this one. If we assume that the 16,500 millionaires that left the UK only had 1 million of assets each, which would not be the case, as many would have much, much more, then that would be a drain of £16.5 billion leaving the country. It's madness. OK, madness it is indeed. Put the kettle on, and I'll see you on the other side of this.
Journalists such as yourself at Talk and in other organisations can examine the people we are selecting. So there is
you
a
understand the frustration feel, though. Oh, God, there's another potential scandal again. He's denied any wrongdoing. We need to stress that.
I can more than understand it.
It can't be more than just Nigel Farage as a one-man band.
I feel it myself. I was there coming up on Saturday to do a Times Radio interview, you know, downstairs, and I thought, my goodness, I'm going to have to defend this now. Yeah. It's a perennial problem. Yeah, I feel it as well, and I can't stress enough how much of the limited resources Reform have are going into solving this problem.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello. We have been doing our research during the advertisements because we like to keep ourselves busy. There is no rest for the wicked. I was right, you know, Stephen Kinnock MP is married to the former Prime Minister of Denmark. Can't imagine they're living in a council house, can you? But talking about being funded by the taxpayer, don't you worry, because the think tank Open Europe, this is back in 2009, did a bit of a report suggesting that Lord Kinnock and his wife Glenys have amassed 6 public sector pensions, right, worth £185,000 a year. Now, if they've been taking £185,000 a year, actually, no, it's worse than that. They've so far received up to £8 million in pay and allowances, according to Open Europe. He is a European Commissioner and she is a member of the European Parliament. If that was in 2009, we're talking that was 16 years ago. I reckon he's probably clocked up a fair amount of money from us. From us. All right, we're the ones who still have to pay the EU contributions to pay off their pension schemes. So, you know, I mean, come on now. He's there going, oh, we need to tax millionaires. What about you, Sunshine? Maybe you don't meet that £10 million threshold. Maybe you've managed to put your assets somewhere else. But it's always these people who live the life of luxury. The European Commissioners going around in their chauffeur-driven cars with their meals out, their invitations to various lobbying groups, their fancy little jollies to lovely places with 5-star hotels. You go, oh, well, you've got to take from the rich. What they mean is you've got to take from the private sector. Never the public sector. No, 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 no. They live on a slush of taxpayers' money for the rest of their lives. We keep them well-heeled. So not them. No, they've done their duty for us. We've got to keep paying for them. No, let's just rob businesses instead and impoverish the country in the process. Let's bring Simon Danchuk back in. I want to ask you about this story because apparently Britain's top police chiefs are urging officers to crack down on cannabis. Sir Andy Marsh, who leads the College of Policing, said frontline officers should do something about the rampant use of cannabis on Britain's streets. Now, what I find remarkable about this, anybody who lives anywhere in Britain, apart from, I don't know, some sort of very remote community, will know that you're basically, by the time you've walked from the bus stop back to your house, you're as high as Bob Marley with the amount of people puffing on a joint everywhere, particularly in London. But when I spoke to the former head of the Met Police Federation, which is the Met Police's biggest union, he intimated to me, as have other police officers privately, that they're told not to do things like going after stuff such as cannabis use because it disproportionately alienates minority communities. I mean, Sadiq Khan himself, let's bring him back into the situation, shall we? He was suggesting, actually in London, we decriminalise cannabis because of the disproportionate amount of young black men who are charged for the offence of possession. And now the top police chiefs are saying, well, this can't go on. I agree with the top police chiefs. It's kind of like the broken windows policy of New York, isn't it? You start getting rid of these sort of small antisocial behaviours and you might start actually being able to crack down on the bigger crimes being committed.
Yeah, absolutely. And these senior police officers who are suggesting a crackdown on cannabis use are aware that it's often linked to more significant crime. That's the concern about this. These are drug dealers who are selling these drugs, and it's often linked to more serious crime, and so that's a concern as well. But they also talk about rebuilding confidence in the police, public confidence in the police. That's what's come out in this report. And as you point out, they're talking about, you know, having a zero tolerance sort of approach, and I think that's exactly what's needed throughout the UK in terms of policing. But I think we are a long way from it. I think the public have really lost faith in British policing and are not convinced that the police are doing a very good job. You know, the general view is that they're more interested in policing the internet than they are tackling issues like shoplifting, cannabis use, and all the rest of it. And that has to change. They really have to get a grip on this. But the problem is, you've senior politicians, as you point out, like Sadiq Khan, who are very laissez-faire about these issues, who actually is a big advocate for decriminalisation, but it's such a mistake. Cannabis isn't what it used to be. It's an extremely serious, strong drug. It's not what it used to be in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s. That's the key issue here.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's also a public health crisis, the sort of prevalent use of cannabis. And I'll tell you what, I've just Googled some statistics here. And this is from the government's own statistics. This is gov.uk ethnicity facts and figures psychotic disorders. When you look at the levels of psychosis, the percentage of people aged 16 years and over who have screened positive for a psychotic disorder among the white population is 0.5%. Among the black population, it's 3.2%. And you have to look at those connections between the common use, the chronic use of cannabis and conditions such as psychosis, how that affects society at large, and really question why we've become so lax when it comes to the way that we police that particular drug. Finally, before I let you go, Simon, I spotted a little story in the papers which I don't know whether I find it entertaining or encouraging or just plain bizarre, which is apparently the NHS are now using drones flying across London from one hospital to the other to convey test results, blood test results and diagnoses and screenings. And they're going to be flying over Kensington Palace. Now, I'm kind of for this. I feel like the future has finally arrived in Britain in 2025.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm very much in support of this. And they've been doing some trials of using these drones. I think it's from Guy's Hospital to St Thomas's. And normally it would take 30 minutes for a motorbike courier to deliver the samples. But it's literally 2 minutes by drone from one hospital roof to another. Can you imagine how quick that is? And the money saved is significant. It saves about 40% of what you pay for a conventional courier. But you know, where I spotted this, you know, I always bang on about Rwanda because my wife's Rwandan to go out there. I was there about 3 or 4 years ago and we were in a relatively remote area and they were using drones to deliver blood to a particular health clinic. And we just saw it fly overhead and then dropped the supplies near to the clinic itself. So, you know, we have to get ahead of the game. Right. You know, this is sub-Saharan Africa that are beating us at some of this stuff. I mean, gangsters have been using drones to drop off drugs in prisons for a long time now. It's amazing. The NHS have only just cottoned on to the idea that they could also join the Sky Superhighway. But look, I am for it. I like modern technology being harnessed, particularly by the health service. Bring it on, I say. Simon, always fantastic having your thoughts on everything. You're a sensible man indeed. The audience love you. Thank you ever so much, Mr. Simon Danchuk. We're going to be nipping off for another cup of tea now, but don't go anywhere because we're going to be digging deeper into the economics of taxing the wealthy. That's coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. Now, we were all young once, weren't we? We all had those fantasies about what the future would look like. We all had an idea of what life was really all about. We were all born with big, bleeding socialist hearts where we thought that actually there was a way of making everything equal and kind, that everyone would be given the same opportunities in life, and that, you know, much like Robin Hood, the naughty, nasty, wealthy King Johns of this world needed to be ransacked in order to help the poorest in society. But then, of course, what happens is we grow up and realise it's all a load of nonsense, just like putting your teeth under the pillow for the tooth fairy to come and pay you a quid. But unfortunately, it seems to me that there are various members of the Labour Party of the socialist bent who still believe in some of those fairy tales, that, I don't know, having a wealth tax, going after the people who contribute more to the economy than anyone else and asking them to pay extra is a solution to all of our problems. Let's speak now to Michael Simmons, who's the economics editor of The Spectator. Michael, I mean, a wealth tax. I'm honest to God, as if the economy and the country wasn't fleeced enough as it is. They now want to tax people with £10 million worth of assets, 2% on them. And look, as lovely as it sounds that this could raise an extra £10 billion a year for the Treasury, the point of the matter is it's going to do the reverse, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the idea that for some reason won't die. It seems to come round every couple of months. But we know this with the crackdown on the non-doms, that they just fled. And we've had data in the last month that shows that Britain is going to see more millionaires leave than any other country, twice as many who are leaving China as they all go to places like the UAE and America. So as you say, you know, if this tax worked and they all stayed and they all paid it, then great, that's, you know, maybe £20 billion for the Treasury. But, you know, if you are a wealthy person who's got these 10 million in assets, it's very easy for you to relocate. And sure, I mean, some would stay and pay it if it were to be brought in. But the fact is, a big enough chunk of them would say, you know, sod this, I'm off to live in a country that actually welcomes me. And then as a result, we'll just have, not only will we not bring in the money that they say it's going to bring in, it could be worse because these people are already responsible for a disproportionate amount of income tax. So we'd lose that too.
I mean, I would love to have £1 million in the bank. I don't. I can't imagine I ever will. Who knows, unless journalism suddenly becomes a profitable enterprise. But the point is this. As grotesque as this is going to sound, £10 million in assets in 2025. We're not talking about the super, super, super rich. We're not talking billionaires anymore. We're not talking about, you know, the UK version of Bill Gates, if such a thing exists. You know, if someone's done fairly well, bought a house in London 20 years ago, that could be them.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, this is what's worrying about it, because I think when people think about this wealth tax, they think, oh, it's the uber wealthy, it's the billionaires, and, you know, maybe they're not really doing anything anyway. But what we're actually talking about, because of that 10 million amount, is, as you say, it's people who have maybe had a small business that's become a medium-sized business. So it's, you know, people running a successful plumbing firm, it's people running successful chains. And if they go, that is all going to disappear. But also it's going to discourage anyone to set up here. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out is I keep hearing from the people that push the wealth tax that, oh, it's about time the wealthy paid their fair share. But if you compare it to the 90s, the wealthy are paying a much, much higher share of their salary than they ever were. So I think, you know, as much as I didn't come into journalism to defend the rich, I think it is true to say that they actually do pay what I would say is their fair share already.
I mean, actually, this is the thing. When you talk about, even if you had a flat tax of 10%, someone earning £10,000 a year is going to pay far less tax than someone earning £1 million a year. And we actually don't have that. We have a sliding scale, and there's taxation on all sorts of other things, VAT and so on and so forth. And you know, at the end of the day, however lovely it sounds that actually if the rich are paid more, wouldn't everybody, you know, be hunky-dory? It's just kind of, you know, pragmatism tells us it doesn't work out that way. And so, as you know, as much as it might stick in the craw of a certain socialist or two, you can't put policies in place that are going to have an adverse effect. Do do you know sort of roughly what the percentage of our Treasurer's income comes from the wealthiest?
Oh yeah, so the top 1% of income taxpayers are already accounting for, I think it's around 30% of the total wealth. And if you look at the very, very top, sort of the end of the curve of taxpayers, if one of those goes, it takes over 1,000 median earners to replace the income that they're sending to HMRC. And we're not exactly creating jobs right now at the moment, are we? So if these people go, it's a heck of a lot of, average earners that you would need to bring into the employment system to get that money back.
And yet skint countries, frankly, are putting in place completely the opposite policies. Countries like Italy, who after the Eurozone crisis has a debt to GDP ratio that would make even Rachel Reeves' eyes water more than they did on the green benches last week. And they tend to be offering packages to billionaires saying, come and relocate here. We'll give you an extra special tax rate that's far lower than you're going to pay at home. We'll give you citizenship and all the rest of it, because they know that actually making your country appealing to the wealthiest, the more billionaires and millionaires you can accumulate on your shores, the more money you are essentially getting into your coffers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the Treasury has belatedly realised this. We heard a while ago that they were looking to reverse some of the changes they've made to the non-dom regime that has made so many of the wealthy leave. But the problem we have now, as we saw with the welfare rebellion last week, is that there seems to be two governments now. There's, the cabinet, who are trying to do cutbacks there, and I think would be unlikely to want to bring in a wealth tax. And then you've got the Labour MPs, who now seem to really be running the show. And I think worryingly, this is an idea that does seem to be popular among them. And some of them, just don't have any clue when it comes to the economy. We heard one of them apparently said last week, I don't understand why taxes need to go up. This welfare U-turn only cost a few £1 billion. These are the people who, unfortunately, do seem to now have control of the government.
Oh, they do. But unfortunately, these people's control is actually ebbing away to people who are even more mental, it seems to me, with the unions such as Unison, a big paymaster of the Labour Party, and a backer of Angela Rayner, who people say could be tipped to take over from Sir Keir Starmer if he somehow manages to get shoved out or just calls it quits because he's not having a good time. Those people drag us even closer to doom. I mean, how far do you think we are from picking up the phone to Christine Lagarde and saying, all right, love, can the IMF send us one of those big charity checks over like they did in the 1970s?
Well, I'm not sure, what point we'll get there, but we're certainly at a point where the markets are thinking, how much more do I want to lend to this country? We saw the bond market shoot up and down again at the scenes of Rachel Reeves being upset last week. And I think economists I was speaking to were saying they were kind of surprised at how sharp that reaction was at what is really like a minor piece of political theatre. But the reason the markets are so volatile is just because of how much debt we have and how much they just have no faith, not only that this country just doesn't want to deliver fiscal responsibility, but even if the government does try to do things that go in the conservative direction fiscally, their MPs will block them and they can't get it through. And I think at that point it becomes dangerous, because the Treasury needs to be able to signal to the markets that it will do things that the markets approve of, and then that improves the rate that will be lent money that we desperately need. But if that connection is broken and markets don't trust what the Treasury is communicating, then I think we really are in territory that we've never been in before, and who knows what happens then.
I mean, it is astonishing, isn't it, that Rachel Reeves having a moment on the green benches caused the markets to react to such an extent that Sir Keir Starmer had to come out and state categorically she wasn't going anywhere. And when the markets are actually asking for someone like Rachel Reeves to stay in position because their replacement could be even more doom-laden, it's really quite a thing, isn't it? I mean, talking about that, we know that Sir Keir Starmer is one for U-turns. He managed to do 6 in a month. He's basically at this point doing like gangster-style donuts in a car park. So I wouldn't sort of stand by his claims that Rachel Reeves is here for a long time to come. But who could replace her? The Times have done a sort of runners and riders with the idea that Rachel Reeves could be for the bin, the dustbin of history. And looking at all the sort of potential people, you've got Pat McFadden, I don't know, he's sort of, maybe he's semi-sensible, I don't know. Jonathan Reynolds, he of the sort of fake lawyer claims. Darren Jones, he's the Undersecretary to the Treasurer. Yvette Cooper, well, most people want to bin off being the Home Secretary, don't they? And Ed Miliband, I mean, geez, we don't want blimmin' Ed Z, do we? But I just, there doesn't seem to be anybody in the Labour Party ranks who would actually have the right sort of approach to the economy, who could withstand the volatile forces of coercion from the backbenchers and the unions, who might actually be able to set us back on the right track. I find myself missing Rishi Sunak.
Well, I think this is the issue. I think of the list of names you brought out, the only one that people would consider, really credible would be Pat McFadden. But I don't think doing a reshuffle would really make a blind bit of difference, at least to how the economy is. But for the reasons you point out, that none of those people are going to be able to get the Labour backbenches or backbench MPs to support the sort of harsh policies that would be needed to turn the current fiscal kind of state of affairs around. And that's a problem that comes from the Prime Minister. Because I think if you speak to Labour MPs, they would say that we would be prepared to vote for, harsh measures and harsh reforms if it was part of some overarching vision of how the country was going to be changed. But Starmer doesn't seem to offer that because he has, no vision. I think Labour MPs think, well, I'm not going to vote for these policies that might take money away from my constituents. So I don't see that changing the Chancellor would really make any difference to that.
No, at this point, it's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, isn't it? Michael, thank you ever so much for giving us some clarity and some empirical evidence behind our suspicions to how bad the situation is in the United Kingdom. Should we do some messages and calls before we roll into commercials? Let's do it. Here we go. Neil Kinnock. How about taxing all of the commissioners, including Kinnock and Mandelson, on their tax-free EU pensions, never mind the public servants' gold-plated pensions? That's Tom in Milton Keynes. So this is the thing. I don't know how it works anymore, but certainly for a long time, if you worked for the EU, you got a special little EU tax, which was like 6%, not the same as you get taxed at home, which is more like 45%. And even if you were taxed 45%, the amount of money and perks and expenses you get if you're connected to that behemoth in Brussels is significant. I should know. I was an MEP for all of 6 months. Tell you what, if I'd stayed there, if we hadn't done blimmin' Brexit, I'd be tooling about in a Lambo by now. But unfortunately, my sense of duty to this country overtook my urge to become filthy rich, and I voted myself into poverty. Let's speak to Ian, who's in Bridgend. Good afternoon, Ian.
Hello, Alex. Pleasure to talk to you again.
Oh, bore da. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Cariad.
Well, yes, now then, Lord Kinnock, Tredegar's finest. Yes, I'm sure he, just like Tony Benn before him, has already wrapped up his assets into a non-discretionary trust, so we won't be touching any of his ill-gotten gains. No, I think, as I was telling Ian last week, this is a sprat to catch a mackerel. At the moment it's £10 million, but as soon as they've established the principle, it'll filter down to the rest of us, and we'll all end up having to basically mortgage our properties to the government until our death, and we'll all be happy because we'll own nothing. That's what it's all about.
Oh, no, do you know what? All of us are going to be paying so much to culturally vandalise our country, take all the money away from the people who built this land and give it all to people who've broken into the UK via Dover on a small boat instead. I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at the cost of immigration to this country, when you look at how many billions are being spent rolling out the red carpet to people who have committed crimes in order to unlawfully enter Britain, people who frankly probably don't even like Britain, who then, even if they did like Britain, and there are lots of people I'm sure who do, are probably wanting to send most of that money back home anyway. It is just economic madness. Ian, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Can I just say, the sort of Bridgend accent, that particular accent in South Wales is one of my favourites on earth, because people think there's just a Welsh accent. Oh no, there's not. There's the Cardiff accent, the Newport accent, then there's a sort of Swansea accent, then you've got that lovely accent around Llanelli and Bridgend, which is my absolute favourite. It's are you a member of a male voice choir, Ian?
No, I'm not. And in fact, my accent, just to correct you there, I come from the Rhondda Valley originally.
Oh, I thought you kind of valleys, yeah.
That's right. A slot down in Virginia. We generally termed as townies down here, they've got a far more refined accent than I have in the main, but no, I've clung on to my Treorchy accent there.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. And go and join a male voice choir. Do your bit for humanity. I do love a Welsh male voice choir. Anyway, thank you, Ian, in Bridgend. Honestly, I just go off on rambling sometimes, and I don't even know where my brain comes up with them. If you want to help me out in the status of rambling around together, like happy campers that we are, then after the break, we're going to be taking even more of your calls. 03444991000 is the number to dial. It is your standard network rate. So get on the blower. Have a chit-chat. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note. 8722 is the number to send a text. You've got to write the words TALK, T-A-L-K, before you send me your message. And we're on X at talkTV, and I'll see you after this.
Most of the Labour MPs voted to prescribe them under the Terrorism Act of 2000. And it goes further, of course, than vandalism, doesn't it, Mike? They sabotage, that's the word I would use, sabotage 2 RAF aircraft to the point of £7 million. But not only did they sabotage them, this is at a time when we're all manner of global conflicts and threats around us. And so to take away the capability from our Royal Air Force, it is an act of terrorism, in my view.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. It is the time that we go all democratic and make the show about you as we open up to a chorus of voices. Let's find out what is on the hymn sheet of Richard, who is in London. Good afternoon, Richard.
Oh, OK. I'll call you back in a minute, Belle. So...
I love that. I love that. That is live radio for you. Who are you on the phone to there, Richard? You thought you had some time, didn't you? You didn't realise you were going to be thrown straight through to the studio. Who was that?
Alex, oh, was there somebody... I'll take another call. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. I want to know who it is.
It's a friend of my mum's. Certainly not.
All right, let's hello to whatever her name is. Sorry that we're taking Richard away from you.
No. Thank you very much. I mean, Alex, what sort of frankly round me up today is this message from King Charles that we mustn't let, on the anniversary of 7/7, we mustn't let things divide us. Now, I'm sorry, we all know that this should never have happened in our country in the first place. We got rid of our terrorism problem with the IRA. We negotiated a settlement. It was all finished. There was this completely unnecessary, and this when we had this problem because of obviously, I'm careful what I've got to say. We all have to be so careful nowadays, but this is to do with our integration problems. And rather than worry about people dividing us and saying and criticising multiculturalism. We should be worried about the fact that there are about 50,000 Islamists on the terrorist watch list.
That is the statistic oft quoted. I mean, look, this is the whole sort of mantra after 7/7 and after the Manchester Arena bombings that we were told, don't look back in anger. And, you know, I always say this, if there was just one incident in the country of some far-right yobbos going and doing something unpleasant to a mosque, it would be front-page news. You just know that this would be headlines everywhere, that it's all we'd talk about. There'd be people standing up and proselytising in front of Parliament about how disgusting and disgraceful all of this is. The fact that I'm not hearing about those incidents, and yet I am still hearing repeatedly of attacks on women, of terror attacks being foiled, of seeing videos online of radical Muslim preachers in Britain saying pretty disgraceful things. Just the other day we were talking about a sort of Muslim dating app, if you will, and find yourself a virgin bride to become your fourth wife, and this is when you can beat your missus according to the Quran. And yet the people they go after is always us, as if we're the problem, when we're actually just sitting there saying to the government, can you just get a grip on what is happening in this country?
Yes. And when there was one racist murder, obviously Stephen Lawrence, we had they turned the country upside down.
Oh, wall-to-wall coverage.
Saying this apparently this institutional racism. But the point is, Alex, there was a direct link to that. It was after that inquiry. I mean, it's no surprise that after that inquiry, you then had 10, 20 years of people covering up the rape gangs because they were scared of being called racist.
Yeah.
So we really do have, and people talk about two-term policing and two-tier policing as if it's recent. No, it goes back about 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And the British people have bent over backwards to integrate everybody. But actually, it's a two-way. It's obviously a two-way thing.
Yeah.
And if I went to Japan or to Nigeria, I would expect to be asked to integrate. I wouldn't be going around demanding all sorts of rights. It's simple as that. Otherwise, I'd expect them to just ask me to leave.
It's this sort of gaslighting that we're being made to believe that there is no existential threat to the UK way of life from certain adherents of Islam. Now, we all have to say the sort of the protocol mantra, which is clearly we're not talking about the Muslim population at large. If we were, we'd be in a heck of a mess, wouldn't we, given how many who are living here. So we know we're not talking about every single Muslim out there is plotting against the West and, believes in these horrible medieval misogynistic viewpoints. But we are talking about certain adherents of Islam, of which I believe we have a disproportionate amount in the UK. And we're being told to sort of whitewash over the atrocities that they commit, the vile values that they seem to uphold in counterpoint to our own cultural mores, and we're being asked to almost excuse those or not pay attention to them or brush them under the carpet. And it just, the centre won't hold.
And it just seems to me, I think the really sad thing is that I expect the politicians to be social engineers, obviously not all of them, but I don't expect the monarch to be a social engineer because he's supposed to stay out of politics.
But very often when the members of the royal family chirp out these particular lines on anniversaries, I think it's often done, hand in hand with the government of the day. Richard, thank you ever so much for your call. Now, you phone your mum's mate back because she clearly had something important to tell you. Thank you ever so much to Richard. Let's squeeze in Mark, who's in Lincolnshire. Good afternoon, Mark.
Hi, good afternoon, Alex. Hope you're well today.
I am.
Jolly good. Just following on from your last call, really, the 7/7 anniversary. And just more in general, the extremist threat, the terrorist threat from Islam, which, let's be honest, that's where it really all comes from. Over 90% or whatever it is of, threats come from Islamist extremism. There's like 40,000 of them on the terror watch list. As far as I'm concerned, Alex, it is blind luck that it's only 40,000 of them on the terror list out of the 3-4 million that are in the country, purely because we will never ever address the central problem. The problem at the heart of Islamic extremism is Islam. We won't address that one thing. We make Islam, the following of Islam, perfectly legal. Now, how can you make a religion that contains things like, just one quote, Surah 8:12, Allah will instill fear in the hearts of those who disbelieve Islam, and Muslims, you cut their limbs by hitting their necks. That's from the Quran. And there's over 20 references like this about things to do to Jews, Christians, non-believers. Unless we start addressing that,
well,
you're not actually going to address the problem.
You make a very good point, Mark. And listen, I'm not particularly well versed on these matters. I don't feel confident enough to stand up as some sort of scholar of the Hadiths and point out various passages within the holy books of that particular religion that are very problematic. But I tell you what, there's a guy on X called Dan Bumawi, Burmawi. I've interviewed him before for my own Substack account. He's a former Muslim, and he is now an apostate, and he is brilliant on looking at the verses, analysing Islam and talking the truth behind some of the ideologies that certain adherents of that religion uphold. So if you're interested in digging deeper into that, I would far sooner you have a look at what he has to say than me, because I could end up in pretty hot water, because sadly we do live in a world where the gaslighting of this subject is still prominent. Mark in Lincolnshire, thank you ever so much. Going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere, because I am back just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back to the show. This is Alex Phillips sitting in for Ian Collins with some balmy, beachy musical beds in the background. I just said at the start of the programme, I've not hosted this show before, and I didn't actually realise it had its own sort of, set playlist to sort of smooth you into the top of the hour. I quite like that. I kind of feel like I want to be sort of on some sort of, what are those beds they put on beaches? I forget what they're called. Not a deck chair. That's where you go on holiday, Tech Up. No, cabana. A cabana. Oh, look, they're like deck chair, sun lounge, a hammock. They clearly haven't been to an upmarket beach resort, have they? No, I'm talking about a cabana, a lovely beach cabana where you sit there and somebody brings you your sort of, luxury-looking cocktail with 50% ice, a few umbrellas and a sort of wilted mint leaf in the top. Yeah, no, I don't go on those sorts of holidays either, you can tell. Anyway, sorry, I do digress, as I want to do, but I'm with you for the next 2 hours to hopefully talk common sense rather than rambling on about things that make sense to nobody, not even me. But to be honest, it's not like the news makes much sense either, especially when that news is about Labour Party policy projections, because the latest revelation we've got today, just as the country is circling the plug hole financially, is good old Lord Kinnock, who, of course, Neil Kinnock used to be leader of the Labour Party, is back in the day. He, whose late wife Glenys was an MEP, he, of course, was an EU Commissioner. His son, Stephen Kinnock, a minister in the Labour Party, married to the former Prime Minister of Denmark, banging on how the wealthiest in society must be taxed to pay for the poorest, saying that a 2% tax on assets worth more than £10 million could help raise £10 billion a year for the Treasury. Well, that's great. You and your extended family will probably cost the Treasury about £10 billion. No, OK, so that is an exaggeration. But they do appear to be a family who have largely been suited and booted by the taxpayer over the course of time. But no. Let's not worry about how much the taxpayer is having to dole out. Let's instead try and get more money from the taxpayer rather than cut the amount they have to pay for things, because that seems to be the direction of travel now of this Labour government. The tug of war between the left and the right of the party seems to, at the moment, being won by the left wing of the party, which has spooked the markets, and it's certainly spooking me. Let's speak to Alan Tolhurst, who's the chief reporter of Politics Home. Good afternoon to you, Alan.
Afternoon.
How likely? I mean, look, this is an article in The Telegraph. Good old Ben Riley-Smith, excellent journalist, and following on from comments made by Lord Kinnock on my namesake, Mr. Phillips' show on Sky News over the weekend, is that he's suggesting we can now tax assets worth more than £10 million to raise more money for the Treasury. The Telegraph says that this is being backed by some of the Labour Party's biggest union paymasters, including Angela Rayner's former employer, Unison. What we need to do as journalists is to establish how likely this is to come to pass. Where do you think we are on the scale of Sir Keir Starmer is going to be browbeaten into introducing something like a wealth tax if the left wing of the party dominate the discourse? Or is he going to be able to stick to his guns, keep Rachel Reeves in position, who in the grand scheme of things is kind of a right-wing chancellor compared to some of her would-be replacements? Because what we've learned after a year of Labour in power is there is a tug of war in that party.
Yeah, I think at the moment it still seems pretty unlikely. People within the Labour Party itself have kind of hosed down this idea of a wealth tax. It's not the way that they want to go. They think there are significant downsides economically, even if it would raise quite a lot of money initially, that it would lead to perhaps lower economic growth and perhaps an exodus of high worth people leaving the country. I think the issue that the government faces essentially now is that they're going to end up at the budget in the autumn with the same sort of dilemma they had ahead of the budget last year and then the spring statement this year, which is that the kind of the projections to kind of get any economic headroom, so the gap between the money that the Treasury brings in and the money it has to spend, is going to have to look either to cuts to spending or increases to taxes. And we've seen how difficult it was for the government to cut spending with the massive welfare rebellion. So therefore, the other option is to try and raise taxes, and there's very few levers left, having had this kind of commitment to not, increasing taxes on things like income tax or national insurance and that sort of stuff. It's very difficult to find places that you can get an awful lot of money from. Otherwise, you're just sort of tinkering around the edges. So I think a wealth tax is something that a lot of people on the left have been pushing for, and as you say now, more of the unions like Unison and USDOR as well, that previously hadn't really been in favour of it, are now talking the language of wealth tax. So I think the drumbeat from within the party and on the left is going to get louder and louder as we head towards October. And when the Treasury gets those figures from the OBR about how the economy is doing, they might have to reach for that kind of a lever. At the moment, they're very much against that, but it depends how the kind of economic picture looks as we get towards the autumn.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is when it comes to a country's finances, you really have two options. One is tax more, or one is cut more. And it seems to me everything the Labour Party have wanted to do to try and cut government expenditure is being met with significant amounts of opposition from within the party. We saw what happened over the Welfare Reform Act, which ended up, rather than saving £5 billion, seems to be costing us £1.5 billion extra. The next sort of aim, the next thing in the crosshairs of the Labour Party that they want to try and sort of find some savings is the budgets for special needs in schools. I didn't realise this, but once upon a time, about 5 years ago, the amount being spent on special educational needs provisions was around £8 billion back in 2021 to 22. 2025 to 26, that is projected to rise to 12 billion a year, which 4 billion extra a year in just 5 years is a significant increase. But understandably, it's a very sensitive topic, and any sort of suggestion they might find ways to cut costs in that particular area of expenditure is being met with quite public opprobrium.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's already talk of being kind of the welfare rebellion Mark II. And I think partly that comes from the fact that the rebellion effectively worked. You know, those MPs who were willing to put their names to those amendments, who pushed the government, did end up seeing those changes reversed. And as you say, the cuts that were going to be in the welfare bill are no longer kind of there at the moment. So I think they understand now that once they've rebelled once, if they are able to exert further pressure, they might be able to get the government to back down again. Where that would leave the Treasury in terms of their finances, you know, who's to say? But for those MPs, I think clearly they don't want to be the MPs who backed cuts to welfare. They don't want to be MPs who backed cuts to special education funding. So therefore, I think we will see kind of further rebellion on this. It's going to reach a head, I suppose, at some point as to, you know, how the Treasury kind of pays for it all. You talked about the two things governments can do. The third thing, obviously, it can borrow more. And previous governments have borrowed lots of money. We are at huge amounts of debt. But the cost of that borrowing has really spiraled in recent years and has not come down. So therefore, the government is unable to borrow in the way that previous administrations have been able to. That's why they're in this kind of the so-called kind of fiscal trilemma, where the three options, none of which are very palatable at the moment.
But when we look at certain articles, when it comes to welfare and state handouts, it's very clear that there are areas where the belt needs to be tightened, to put it mildly. Now, this story jumped out at me this morning in the Daily Mail because it's just lunatic. The Motability scheme. Now, this is where people who suffer from a range of disorders, people who are already on benefits, can cash in some of the benefits they receive in return for being given a free car, a taxpayer-funded car. Now, I've got the statistics here, right, on who's got cars and for what reason. So, ADHD, over 9,000 cars have been given out. Why do you need a car? Why do you have a free car if you've got ADHD? I don't understand. This one is even crazier. Alcohol misuse, 770. What does this turn into? A self-drive vehicle if you leave the pub and you want to get into your motor? Anxiety and depression, 32,000. I suffer from anxiety. Everyone suffers from anxiety. Why do 32,000 people have a free car? This one, constipation. Now, I can understand you might need to get somewhere quickly if you have the reverse of that particular syndrome. You might not want to be hanging around and waiting at a bus stop if you've got to hot-foot it to a bathroom. But if you've got constipation, it doesn't seem as much of a pressing concern. Depressive disorder, elbow disorders, obesity. If you're obese, I recommend you start walking a bit more. Allergies, food intolerance. 20 people have got cars because of food intolerance. I mean, surely if we're going to start scrapping any particular scheme, the Motability operations, the company behind Motability, is sitting on a surplus of £4 billion, all of which comes from taxpayers' money. I would start getting rid of giving cars to people who can't have a poo.
Yeah, it's a very strange story, and clearly, kind of the idea behind the scheme to help people who are unable to get around, who even to use public transport they find really difficult, or in areas where public transport is not an option, to be able to not get extra money, but to use part of that benefit to use for a car. I think it's a great idea, but the way that the scheme has gone, like, it does seem very strange. I mean, yeah, the one about tennis elbow really kind of got me. This idea that, you know, because of you've got a bit of tennis elbow, you somehow need a brand new car. It's a very strange idea.
That one to me makes a little bit more sense, because if you've got something that restricts your ability to use your arm, then you might need a specially adapted vehicle that doesn't have like a big old steering wheel like this. But constipation, for crying out loud, I mean, what is the risk of that?
And the scheme clearly has got out of control, because if you look at they now account for like a huge percentage of all of like the new cars to get bought, and because of the way the system works, it only provides brand new cars as well. So it's a very odd system where people on benefits are the ones getting all these kind of brand new cars. It's definitely one that needs to be looked at again, and one that would definitely, I think, would have some public support, and would probably have more support certainly from those politicians who are against other sorts of cuts. So definitely one for the government to look at, I think.
Honestly, if you were to get a free car, what would be your excuse? I'd be eczema. I'm like, I'm itchy. I'm a really itchy person, so give me a new set of wheels.
I don't know. laziness, I guess. I don't know.
Actually, don't you worry. That's actually covered. It's
there we
covered.
go.
No. I actually circled this. 10 people with a failure to thrive got a taxpayer-funded car. There you go. Alan, you're entitled. Go get your Mazda. Now, let's play a little clip, because the Conservatives are really cashing in on Labour chaos. I mean, you know, some could say pot kettle, but let's see what they've been sticking out online.
Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain with wealth created in every community.
I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. This budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
Inflation jumps more than forecast to its highest rate in over a year, prompting investors to bet against more rate cuts from the Bank of England.
Secure borders.
The number of migrants crossing the Channel to the UK in small boats in the first half of this year has risen by more than 40% compared with the same period last year.
Safer streets.
Today, in England and Wales, more than 1,000 prisoners are expected to be released under the UK government's early release scheme, having served only 40% of their sentences.
Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
Have you lost control of your MPs, Prime Minister?
Control of the MPs, Prime Minister. The thing is, they must think that the voters are muppets, because we look at that and it just reminds us of the Conservative government, doesn't it? I mean, is this stuff working? Are the Conservatives, is the needle moving in terms of favourability stakes in the polling?
Well, not for the Conservatives. Certainly for Labour, their obviously popularity has gone down, but the beneficiaries have not been the Conservatives. The beneficiaries have largely been Reform, and also, and similarly, previously with the Liberal Democrats, as we saw how well they did last year's election. So, yeah, I think it's unlikely that it's necessarily helping the Conservatives, who aren't really in that place to kind of build on that. But clearly, you know, we did a lot of polling and focus group work last week for the kind of 1 year anniversary of the election, and there is a lot of disquiet, a lot of feeling that they gave Labour their vote, and in return they've not got back what they wanted from it. So yeah, I think a lot of those things around the economy, around things like smash the gangs and the illegal migration stuff, has not really been able to come to fruition so far. So yeah, there is quite a lot of, if not anger, certainly I think disappointment with the voters. I think, you know, Labour have got to stick the course. There's 4 more years till an election. There is plenty of time to still turn things around, but certainly that kind of report card after 1 year in office is not looking particularly great.
No, that it ain't. And it seems to me that there is an appetite, there has been across Western Europe, for entryist parties, for political insurgencies in the form of populism to be given a go, whether we're talking about France or the Netherlands or Italy, the list goes on and on and on. And yet, when it comes to the sort of two-party state that we have had in the United Kingdom, it is very similarly echoed in America, where it's always a straight battle between the Republicans and the Democrats. But much like us in Western Europe, they seem to have their own divisions plaguing them now, as Elon Musk has decided to go and launch his own political party. I mean, we've seen a few people in the UK doing this. I would suggest, you know what, if you're heading towards retirement, you've got money in the bank, focus on the golf or buying some vintage cars. Stop setting up political parties. And the latest person to decide that they want to throw their hat into the ring is Elon Musk. And Trump says he's saddened to watch Musk go off the rails after he vowed to launch a political party, which the president says is going to cause chaos. I'm minded, I must admit, to agree with Donald Trump over this one.
Yeah, I think it will cause chaos, but actually quite often when there are third-party candidates, when they have been sort of successful in America, which have not been, you know, they've never won, obviously, but if you think back to sort of 1992 with Ross Perot, he basically prevented George H.W. Bush from winning and allowed Bill Clinton to win. So essentially, when they do cause chaos, they tend to cause chaos more for the parties on the right in America. And I think that's clearly what Donald Trump is thinking, that actually it doesn't need an Elon Musk-backed party to actually start to win elections, but it does need it to, or it could essentially cause a lot of damage to Republicans if it starts to peel away sort of 10-20% of voters who would have previously been sort of MAGA Republicans. So I think that's where the kind of the chaos could come. And clearly Elon Musk is very unhappy about this big beautiful bill and all the kind of the tax cuts, the spending cuts in that. And so clearly he's going to try and cause some chaos in that sense. But yeah, I mean, yeah, whether he'll actually be able to stick the course, he doesn't seem to necessarily be able to want to kind of follow through on a lot of these kind of these threats and stuff. Whether he'll actually be still bothered about this in in 3-4 years' time at the next election remains to be seen. He might, as you say, instead of his version of going golf is trying to go to Mars. So I think he might be more interested in that by the time we get to the next election.
Yeah, that is very well said indeed. Alan, thank you ever so much. Fantastic political analysis as per usual. Let's do some of your messages before we go to advert break, because this one is absolutely brilliant. This is from Pamela, who says, I can't understand how someone can get a Motability card just for constipation. You have to be getting PIP enhanced mobility to be eligible, which means that you're unable to walk more than 20 metres without difficulty. And then this is the best one, rich in West Wales, Mobility cars. My sister-in-law gets, oh no, it wasn't there, but there's loads of people talking about mobility cars. This isn't the one that stood out, but let's do this anyway. My sister-in-law gets a mobility vehicle because her daughter has ADHD and her husband drives it all the time. Like, what about ADHD means you need a free car? Like, can someone explain that to me? I just don't understand. Surely if you're sort of like, you know, constantly, you're sort of probably going to be quite a good driver. I don't know. Hi, Alex. I expect the people who... So this is the one I liked. This is Aubrey in Upminster. So thank you, Aubrey. I expect the people who suffer from constipation would need a specially adapted car with no reverse gear, as further backing up is definitely not required. We like that. Motability is a massive backhanded subsidy to the UK motor industry, hidden behind supposedly doing good. 20% of new cars is a lot. I agree with that, Steve in Bromsgrove. I think it has been a bit of a sop to the ever-beleaguered auto trade in this country. We are a country of automotive excellence. At least we used to be. Coventry used to be the sort of headquarters of car manufacturing, but over the course of time, with EU subsidies moving production out to Eastern Europe and Turkey, etc., with the highest energy bills in the world, we've kind of, you know, sounded the death knell on auto manufacturing in this country. So I agree with your suspicions that the Motability scheme might actually have been a bit of a sop to car manufacturers. Brad in Cambridge says, you said the answer is either to tax more or cut more. The answer is actually to grow more. But this government doesn't know how to do that. You're right. I don't think any government knows how to do that. And, you know, when it comes to growing more, I would say what you need to do is essentially cut more, don't you? You need to get rid of red tape. You need to get rid of bureaucracy. You need to get rid of punitive taxation that prevents investment. OK, let's go to an advertisement break now, because when we come back, a very special guest indeed, who's talking to us 20 years on from 7/7. What is the terror threat level in the United Kingdom today? That's after this.
Actually, we need to remember that 50 people were killed and tens of people in a series of incidents again and again and again since have been killed by Islamic terrorists in this country. It is a serious problem. It is
the single biggest threat to
It
our
has not
country.
got better. In fact, it's got worse. And the authorities, the media, far too many people outside of this channel are determined to shut down any conversation of it. And it's an outrage to those 50 people who we remember were brutally murdered 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We are told, aren't we, to not look back in anger on the anniversary of 7/7, the horrific Islamist bombings on the UK's London Underground 20 years ago. But what if we do need to look back in order to stay vigilant, in order not to gloss over the fact that terrorism is alive and well in the United Kingdom today? Because I think it's very important that we continue to have this conversation, which is why I have on the show right now Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome aboard, Alan. Great to have you back on the programme. Now, little known secret, I used to work for Alan back in the day at the Henry Jackson Society for a period of time, and I remember back then your impressive think tank had created a report showing that I think the rate was something like one big terror attack was being intercepted and foiled by our security services every single week. Where do we stand today?
Well, today we obviously stand on there being, as you pointed out, quite a lot of terrorism still around, or prospective terrorism. I mean, the amazing thing, thank goodness, we have not had a mass casualty terrorist attack for a number of years. But that isn't because the terrorists aren't trying. It's because our security services have been excellent at thwarting those plots, and the nature of the plots have changed. It's interesting to note that MI5 tell us that 75% of their time is currently occupied by radical Islamist terrorism. That's the sort of area they are most concerned about in terms of the numbers. They do have far right-wing terrorism to focus on, and presumably now a bit of far left terrorism, seeing as Palestine Action has also been prescribed. So there's a sense of you are getting terrorist attacks from across the board, but radical Islam remains the main focus. It is a clear and present danger, and it has only been by the grace of God and by the ingenuity of the security service that we prevented things from happening. Yes, the threat's changed from 7/7. It's different. It's not, Al-Qaeda organising cells in this country. It's more online radicalisation, but the threat remains.
Someone has suggested to me, and I don't know, this isn't sort of necessarily verifiable, that we could have as many as 30,000 trained Islamist fighters in this country. Look, I don't know whether that is able to be corroborated or not, but what occurs to me is on October the 7th, it took just 3,000 Hamas terrorists to commit the mass atrocities in the kibbutz in Israel on that day. And we're talking about Israel, a nation that has eyes on everywhere in Hamas, who defends that border vigilantly, who are prepared every single day, who has a standing army of 169,500 plus 460,000 reservists. And if we were to imagine that there might be Lord knows how many fully trained Islamist fighters in this country with a standing army of 67,000, we're in trouble deep, aren't we?
Well, I doubt there are 30,000 trained Islamist fighters. Now, are there 30,000, Islamist potential terrorists? Yes, that's definitely the case. We know that because we know that there is a watch list of terror suspects where we have eyes on them, and that number is somewhere in the 40,000. Now, obviously, they won't all be radical Muslim, but given the percentages we were talking about before, you can see where the numbers lie and where it falls. So, yes, there are a large number of, potential suspects, potential people here. They're not going to do a 7/7 style, an October 7th style attack in the UK though, because of it's a different case. They wouldn't have the capacity to launch something in the way that would happen. The threats we face here, are much more at the moment sort of lone wolf attacks or small groups coming together, like we saw with the Iranians arrested a couple of months ago, trying to commit terror attacks here. So it's a slightly different focus. It doesn't mean, of course, that the effects will not be horrific for anyone caught in such a plot.
Let's talk about Palestine Action now, because for a long time when I've seen these pro-Palestine marches snaking through London, I'd consider them to be a perfect recruitment drive. If you were happened to be an Islamist entity who wanted to find out who might join the cause, then setting up a few Facebook groups banging on about genocide and getting people to wave the suspect flags on the streets of London is a great way of going about knowing who might be part of your cohort. And what I think is shocking is this idea that Palestine Action, it was recommended by security chiefs that Palestine Action be prescribed back in March, and yet the Labour government sat on this until June, possibly because of the local elections. Why on earth do the government's not seem to be taking the threat from entities such as this seriously?
Well, the government has to answer that question. I think the reality is that once an RAF base was breached, the government had no choice but to do this. Look, there are, of course, legitimate questions about, where you draw the line on protest versus terrorism. The clear reality, though, right now is that this group has crossed that line. That's why, and the security services recognised it's crossed that line some time ago, because this isn't about, just protest. It's about direct action. And apparently, from what we are starting to hear, it was direct action with plans where weapons were being used as well. And it wasn't simply that damage was being caused to things. There's a thought that there might actually be more violent attacks coming, and I think that's part of what the security services know, and we don't. And I would hope that some of this information will become apparent in some of the court cases that will be coming. We can't, of course, discuss them because of the nature of court cases, but we are hoping that there'll be more information available then. And I think once that happens, it will become much more obvious as to why there might have been a need to do this sooner. But look, governments are in difficult positions, but this is an obvious case where when you face a threat, you ought to have taken action sooner, and eventually that led to an RAF, base being breached. But it could have been much worse, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old adage, isn't there, that, when it comes to security services, they have to be right 100% of the time. They've got to get it right 100% of the time. A terrorist entity only needs to get it right once, to not be foiled once. Remember back in the day, we used to have a sort of traffic light system for the levels of terror threat. We were told about it all the time. It gave rise to seeing more visible armed policing on our streets and defensive measures made around transport hubs. Where are we at today?
Well, it does still exist. I mean, you've got the different statuses, which you're referring to, of course, in terms of, where we would sit in that process. At the moment, we're not seeing, the sort of the mass, fear that there'll be something tomorrow. But you can be sure that if the security services do feel there's something, there was something fairly recently. If you remember, the threat level was raised. You will hear about it. So the security services are vigilant on these subjects. They're the reasons we are being kept safe right now. There are people out there on our streets who want to harm fellow citizens of this country. The security services are stopping them, and when it is appropriate, they do raise the level according to the intelligence that they get. So I think, we're doing a pretty good job. But as you said earlier, we have to get it right 100% of the time, and the terrorist only has to get it right once, and then you have a mass casualty event. And we must hope that our luck holds on this, intelligence holds, and that we keep on maintaining the networks and the understanding of what's coming to make sure that we don't have more attacks on our streets.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you ever so much. It's always brilliant talking to you, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. They're well worth following, by the way. Look at some of the reports that they produce and stay abreast of their research, because they are fully plugged into this. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, kind of keeping in the same vein, recent reports have suggested that the level of rape gangs in London has been massively downplayed, that apparently it seems that whilst rape gangs exist all around the country, in various other urbanised areas, towns and cities, that we've not really looked into London. And yet, unsurprisingly, London is a hotbed of such deplorable and disgusting activity. We're going to be discussing that after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So this story has caught my eye. It's about child grooming in London, with reports that it is at catastrophic levels, in fact more catastrophic than anywhere else in the country. That's according to a care sector activist and an abuse survivor, Chris Wilde. Said grooming and criminal exploitation are rife in the capital, and it's being missed due to poor data sharing and underfunded services. Indeed, in the review by Baroness Louise Casey into rape gangs across England, they found a mismatch in the way that the Met Police and local authorities record child abuse. Now, if we know that there are rape gangs targeting children in other inner city areas, in other metropolitan boroughs, to the extent across the country that it has been, why is it that we don't seem to be finding such examples in London? I think that was a question well worth asking, which is a question that the leader of the Conservative group in the London Assembly, Susan Hall, put to the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who also happens to be the Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, just watch his response. It will make your blood boil.
I asked you this question last week and you found every which way but not to answer it. Just how many grooming gangs have we got in London?
To avoid any misunderstanding, can she define what she means by that?
Yes, if you look at what's gone on in Rotherham, where there are people taking young girls, grooming them for sex, that is what I'm talking about.
We know in London there are issues about exploitation of young people, but they're not as defined by the member in her definition of what those types of gangs are.
So are you saying we haven't got the same sort of gangs that are in Rotherham, Bradford and lots of other places in the country?
Just for you misunderstanding, what does she mean by that?
You know full well what I mean by that. It's all over the television. You know exactly what I mean by that. These gangs of people that are grooming young girls for sex. Do we actually have those in London?
I'm unclear, Chair, what is meant by the question. If you could spell it out, I can answer.
I've just spelt it out. Are you not listening? It's the sort of gangs that groom young girls at a young age for sex. Exactly how much clearer do you want me to be?
That makes me so livid I could cry. That disgusting human being who happens to be the Mayor of London, who also happens to hold the title of the Police and Crime Commissioner as part of that role, that responsibility, obfuscating, gaslighting, bullying, belittling. These are little girls, underage minors, being raped by gangs in our capital city. You do not play games over this. If this was anybody else in any other position of authority, that clip alone should have seen his head roll. London Mayor, you're a disgrace. You're disgusting. You do not deserve to be in that position. Not when the welfare, the well-being, the dignity, the integrity, the safety and the innocence of children in the capital city is at stake. You are the most deplorable, despicable, horrible human being to answer that question like that. Now, you get back in that seat, you answer the question properly, you get the stats, you hold the police to account. That is what you're supposed to be doing. That is what I'm paying you to do. As someone who pays taxes, living in London, I should expect no less. The country should expect no less. You disgust me. Right, I've got that off my chest. Let's speak now to Emma Best, who is the Conservative Deputy Leader in the London Assembly. Emma, I mean, look, I cannot fathom how he has the audacity to sit there in mayoral question time and respond to what is an extremely serious and valid line of questioning from your leader on this most sensitive and important of subjects. I'm horrified. What did you make of all of that?
Yeah, good afternoon, Alex. And you speak not only for the whole of London, but the UK. That's the disgust that we all feel. Because what you've seen from the Casey report, what you've seen from reports over the weekend is exactly what we feared. When you look at and hear those testimonials from those poor girls across the country, and you look at the elements to how those cases were allowed to rear their head, you could only see that we were likely to have issues like that in London. We had failing authorities. We had a Met Police service that was scared to be called racist. We had the profile of those victims across the capital. We knew we were likely to have it. It's such a serious issue. I wouldn't begin to speculate as to why the mayor thought it was acceptable to respond in that way. All I can say, it was absolutely unacceptable. This is a really serious case. These are people's lives, not just past victims. We probably have current victims as well. That's why in February we had a fully costed inquiry that we put into the budget. Labour voted against that then. Luckily, they have U-turned nationally. But look, in City Hall Conservatives, the first report we did on this was 10 years ago. That's how long we have been saying there is likely to be an issue of this scale in London.
And there is, and what we know is the way that the Metropolitan Police and local authorities in London have been recording statistics on child abuse is out of sync with other parts of the country. So we know that there are failings. We know that there must be cases slipping through the cracks as a result of this inconsistency. And we know that the buck stops with Sadiq Khan because he, as the Mayor of London, is in lieu of a police and crime commissioner. I think the man should resign.
Well, I think on this and many other reasons, it's been clear that he is not fit to be the Mayor of London, and I would certainly be calling for his resignation. But I just hope that Londoners see this, and I hope they see that it's not just political differences they have. He has a disdain, I think, for Londoners, and the way in which he conducts himself is not. He is not fit to be the Mayor of our capital, and I think this incident. When you see that perfectly reasonable line of questioning from our leader, Assemblymember Hall, I don't know how you could be more reasonable about what is a topic that is going to rightfully make people angry. I don't know how you could be more reasonable and to get that response. I hope people see this, and I hope people will remember it. And I do not hope that he gets the privilege to run over our city for much longer after this. But in the meantime, he needs to do something about what actually is the problem around the victims that we likely have across the capital.
Well, I mean, I don't quite know what, only he can know in his own head what he was trying to do there, but I got the impression he's saying, oh, try and define what you're talking about. I don't understand. You'll have to spell it out more clearly. I get the feeling he was basically trying to play the race card and portray her as some sort of xenophobe or Islamophobe, which is a disgusting way of trying to gaslight someone into not pursuing what is the most important of subjects. What is being done in London now? Has there been any change? What can we hope for in terms of unearthing and uncovering what could be going on in our capital city and starting to put things right?
Well, firstly, we do hope this national inquiry is going to look in detail at London. We've seen from the Casey report the problems laid bare, and as you said there, we've seen the issue with the data. So the data basically shows us between local authorities and the Met Police, it is undeniable that children are being lost in the system. So we really need to push on that now and make the Mayor look into that as soon as possible while we wait for the national inquiry to go through. It was really upsetting that in February we could have began work on this. Like I said, the City Hall Conservatives put forward a plan to make sure that we were beginning to look into that now, and Labour rejected it. I do hope now they do more after the national government of U-turn. But just to come back to that questioning from Susan Hall, as I said, I couldn't tell you why he thought it was okay to behave in that way. But what I do know is this is the most serious of crimes, and he was playing a game of some sort. Only he could tell you what the game was. But he was playing a game of some sort with what is one of the most severe and disgusting crimes that we've seen in this country.
Yeah, I think we all have a hunch of what game he might be playing. I've got a viewer who's messaging saying Khan didn't answer the grooming scandal question because he was goading her into saying Muslim or Pakistani so he could shut her down as a racist. Sadiq Khan boils my blood, says someone else. How does that childish response around rape gangs, how is it befitting of a Knight of the Realm? The UK should remove the title immediately. Just as you said, this is not an issue that you can play political games over. This is not an issue where we should ever tolerate somebody using those sort of sly ways of framing somebody as being a xenophobe or an Islamophobe or a racist, because we know that that has been all part of the cover-up, which has enabled these gangs to be able to act for decades now with hundreds of thousands of victims.
Yeah, and I have to say that in the Casey report, she made clear that in 2/3 of cases, ethnicity data hadn't been recorded alongside these crimes. She made clear that authorities had shied away from the issue of race. So now that Dame Casey has said it, hopefully the likes of Sadiq Khan will take it seriously, because it's victims that have paid the price for that. But also, it should be said, it's also minority ethnic communities that are paying a price, because they want this investigated as well. They are saying, don't tarnish everybody with the same brush. Don't let this get pushed under the cover. And they want this investigated just as much as anyone else. And we are doing a disservice by not talking about it, not only to them, but of course the victims.
Yeah, you're right, actually, because we know in Oldham, for example, some of the whistleblowers, when it came to the perpetrators of these sick acts, these sick criminal acts, were the daughters and the wives of the men involved. So I totally agree with what you're saying. Look, if I were to make one recommendation, never let that clip go. Make sure you've got it on your file, and make sure you keep hammering him every single chance. You make sure you put him on the spot, because I will not stand for the mayor of my city to behave like that when it comes to such an important topic. Emma, thank you ever so much. Great to have you on the programme. Honestly, my heart is still beating. I get very, very angry at certain things. And when it's the safety of little girls, when you read some of the court transcripts to what girls around the country were put through at the hands of these rape gangs, it is just the word. There are no words in the English language to describe the horror of what was going on. And we know it's happening in London, because it can't be that London somehow lives under some sort of bubble where the mantra diversity is our strength is just sort of, you know, blanket operational. We know that if those activities are taking place in other countries, in other counties, that it's going to be happening in our capital as well. And I think it is beyond an abrogation of duty to gaslight, to bully, to intimidate, and to potentially play what I think may have been the race card when it comes to this topic. I don't understand how that man is still in that position. I don't understand how more has not been made of what he did that day. And I do hope that all London Assembly members, regardless of the colour of your rosette, go back and you ask the London Mayor again, because he is, as I said, the head of the police, politically speaking, in our capital city. You ask him again, because if you do not, you are letting down innocent girls. You're letting down victims. You are on the wrong side of history, my friend. He needs to be held accountable. Right, we're going to go to an advert break now, but don't go anywhere, because after the break, we're going to be discussing, this is a big debate going on in Parliament today, we're going to be discussing whether there should be an advertising ban on fossil fuels. That's coming up after this.
It's basically calling on the government to come forward with a discussion document to look at the issues.
Raina becomes Prime Minister of this country. She's obsessed with this Islamophobia law. I'm out. I'm gone.
Yeah, well, you've got plenty of places you can move to.
She is not only thick, she's dangerously thick and massively ideological. And
she's also quite a clever politician, though.
Be.
No, but she's also quite a clever politician, and she's certainly
she's ruthless.
She's clever enough to run rings around the entire Labour Party.
Yeah,
she would definitely
she's
get
well
in there.
savvy. Oh, Limonec.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. Right, there is a debate going on today in the UK Parliament over whether advertising and sponsorship by fossil fuel producers should be allowed to happen, because we do know that companies such as Shell and BP have supported, let's say, the British Museum, the Science Museum, the Royal Opera House, the National Portrait Gallery, the Royal Shakespeare Company, and even the Tate Gallery. Well, there are calls now to outlaw the sponsorship deals that many fossil fuel companies do, particularly in the world of the arts, much like we have banned tobacco advertising. Someone who supports that particular motion is Sir Jonathan Porritt, CBE, who's an environmental campaigner, and he joins me now. I don't understand the logic of this, if I'm honest with you, Jonathan. I mean, at the end of the day, we all are told all the time that climate change is horrible, that fossil fuels are dangerous to the environment. But I kind of think they make such huge amounts of money while we still need to use them, that if they throw a bit of cash back in the direction of the arts, what's the harm?
The harm is that it gives people a false impression of the role that these companies are actually playing in society at the moment. And they're not bona fide actors. They are often acting very dishonestly in ways that we can't see. They're often obstructing people from understanding the true science of climate change. They're using some of those proceeds, some of those profits, as you said, to undermine climate scientists, to win levels of influence in ways that they can no longer really lay claim to. So the comparison with banning the advertising of and the marketing of cigarettes is a very appropriate one, because it really is true now that these fossil fuel companies are acting against the interests of society as a whole in a way that is prejudicial to the interests of all citizens, not just here in the UK as it happens, but this is obviously the country where we can begin to make a difference.
I mean, there are a lot of people, particularly my listeners, who feel that the net zero targets have been very onerous on the United Kingdom, that perhaps while we still have to import fossil fuels, things like liquefied natural gas from abroad, that we are going to need fossil fuels to pave the way for any transition to the full green energy revolution, and that actually that this might be sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, pension funds have lots of investments shored up in big oil and big gas. What's going to happen to all of these, all these museums and galleries that are currently have very lucrative sponsorship deals with energy companies? Is this not essentially throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
Well, it's not really a baby. It's an absolutely huge monster that you're talking about. And what will happen depends on how smart we are in making this transition. The transition is going to happen, Alex, come what may. The transition is absolutely unavoidable, because otherwise we, like many other countries in the world today, will be exacerbating a problem that is already very, very severe indeed. So you mentioned a couple of examples, such as people's investments in fossil fuels. Okay, the writing's on the wall for everybody who manages those pension funds. We are going to have to get our investments out of fossil fuels. So start planning for that now. People, organizations, museums being sponsored by fossil fuels, it is inevitable that will come to an end. So start planning to do that now. There are plenty of arts organizations that are not dependent on sponsorship from fossil fuel companies that are making a perfectly good go of that. It's a question of understanding the nature of this transition, which we're in. It's starting already. And we just need to know that it's going to accelerate, and therefore we need to plan for it.
But surely we need the big energy firms to be at the centre of that transition. We need them on side. We need to sort of make sure that they're part of the sort of kumbaya singing circle of environmental activists and not ostracised. And surely, actually, if they're sort of not going to be sponsoring various museums and art galleries, they're just going to recoup that money for themselves.
I don't understand your point. Apart from the cheap insult, I don't understand your point.
No, what I'm saying is, at the moment, at least there's a philanthropic edge to some of their profits where they're giving those to particular social endeavours. And if they're banned from doing that, we're sort of destroying the relationship with the very companies we need to be part of any sort of energy revolution. And they'll just keep the money.
We don't need those companies to be part of the energy revolution. Those companies all had a chance some time ago to transition away from their investments in fossil fuels and to become integrated energy companies. And for a long time, companies like Shell and BP actually said that's what they were going to do. They would diversify their portfolios, they'd reduce the amount of new capital going into fossil fuels, and they'd come out at the other end, firstly as a more integrated energy company, and then basically a pure play, renewable storage efficiency type company. They then went back on all of that. It was all just so much greenwash. So they let down, they betrayed people who thought that the big energy companies could be part of the transition and help with that transition. It turns out they can't. They absolutely can't, because they're under massive pressure to go on generating these profits for their shareholders. So they are not significant players in the transition to a fossil fuel-free future. They're not. And we don't need them to be that either.
Do pension funds not need them to be that?
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, pension funds are just going to have to understand that the future of their holdings cannot continue to depend on companies that are causing such massive damage to the interests of humankind. It will come. This is just inevitable. When people understand the nature of the risk that we're running by continuing to depend on fossil fuels, by our continuing addiction, as is being pointed out by people, then those changes will happen. So the point that we're saying in all of this is get ready for it. Stop going into these kind of denial and concerns about things that are just inevitable. Get ready for it.
So Jonathan Porritt, CBE environmental campaigner, thank you ever so much for coming on and explaining that particular debate going on in Parliament today. Now, look, we've got someone on the line. Just before the previous advert break, we were talking about what was going on in London, or what may be going on in London regarding grooming gangs. And I had a bit of a rant about Sadiq Khan, and we've had a whistleblower call up, a mental health nurse. Now, I'm not going to disclose where. I think it's important to protect the identity of whistleblowers when it's such an important subject. So I'm not going to reveal the identity, the name or the location of the next caller, but please welcome them to the show. You've called up listening to what Emma Best and I were talking about in London, and you have very deep concerns that you have, well, based upon your own professional position. Tell us more.
Yes, I work in mental health. I've worked in mental health for many, many years. My role in recent years has been assessing people that turn up at A&E who are in a mental health crisis. And one evening, many, many years ago, probably 12, maybe 15 years ago, I assessed a person who was from Pakistan with a colleague of mine, and very quickly I had to inform him that I needed to tell him that I needed to breach his confidentiality, because what he was talking about was... Excuse me, I'm very nervous.
So you've got time, don't worry.
Yeah. So he'd come to England from Pakistan at the age of 17, and very quickly he said he became friends with a number of other Pakistani men, and he went on to say that between the several of them, they were having sex with girls as young as 12, and probably a dozen or so. And I informed him that I obviously need to breach his confidentiality and disclose this to the police. That was done. The police eventually became involved, and they kept trying to interview him. And every time they went round to interview him, or in the cells, not in the cells, at the police station, he would just lower his head and not say anything. But what he hadn't ever told them was he had a diary, but no surnames of the girls he was abusing, and he had first names of his accomplices, but he refused to give surnames. And eventually the police said Well, it's a victimless crime. Unless we've got people coming forward to actually say they've been abused by this person and his friends, it's a victimless crime. There's nothing they can do about it. We were seeing him in his home environment as well, and his wife was very supportive of him. She said he's found God now, he's found Allah, and he's been going to the mosque 5 times a day and praying for forgiveness. But, and this is, I couldn't believe it when she came out with this, she said it was their own fault, because if they'd have been good girls, they wouldn't have been hanging around with older men, taking drugs and using alcohol. So it was their fault. And when she said that, I said, what's the age of consent in Pakistan? She said 16. I said, well, what would happen if something like this happens to girls in Pakistan? She said they'd probably get killed, these people.
I cannot imagine how you, as a mental health nurse, coped with that, coped with the revelation that you were faced with somebody who was confessing to these crimes, who knew various people involved, who had the information that could have led to not just the prosecution of the individuals involved, but the protection of the victims, and yet were powerless to act. Did anything come of this in the end?
No, absolutely nothing. He played the mental health card for months and months and months. I think the consultant colluded with him as well, kept saying, well, he can't answer the questions because he's depressed. But yeah, between seeing him in his home environment as well, and when I used to go around there, I said, well, what's he been like between visits? Oh, he's been doing some things. He's been talking. But every time he went round there, he would just lower his head and not talk. So I think why he confessed is, and this is only speculation, but I think the reason he confessed is, yes, he had found God, he'd got married, and he had 2 girls. He had 2 children, young girls.
And the guilt became too much.
And I think he was looking at his girls and thinking, what's happened to my children?
Yeah. Listen, thank you ever so much for your call. I can hear the emotion and the nerves in your voice. You've been so courageous contacting the show today. Wow. Listen, I think it's the perfect time to have a little break and then take a breath or two.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Well, welcome if you've only just tuned in. If you have, you've missed some pretty dramatic stuff because I've had to take a bit of a deep breath after our last call there. We actually had a whistleblower, a mental health nurse. I'm not going to disclose where they are practicing their profession, but what they had to say about what they have come across in the line of duty was, well, horrifying, quite frankly, reflecting quite the level of trouble we have with rape gangs. Yeah, I'm discombobulated by it. I'm sure many of you who are listening are too. And it all came off the back of a bit of a sort of a fire and fury rant I had about the Mayor of London, deliberately obfuscating and gaslighting and belittling and bullying Susan Hall, who is the Conservative leader in the London Assembly, when she was questioning him over the nature of the problem when it comes to rape gangs in our capital city. It makes my blood boil. I just don't think it's in any way correct or moral to not take this issue with the seriousness, the gravity that it deserves. We're talking about the integrity, the innocence and the well-being of little girls, our girls. And to play games around that subject is, I mean, it's just beyond, it's beyond words. It's beyond pardon. That's my opinion. I'm going to stick by it. I don't care. I'm not going to back down from that. I just don't think it's... You're the Mayor of London. You're Sir Sadiq Khan. Answer the question. Right. OK, let's get back into politics. And we've heard it all before, haven't we? That this Labour Party know how to solve the problem. Stop the boat, said the Conservative Party. Smash the gang, said Sir Keir Starmer. Well, every single thing he has suggested doing has turned out to be a bit of a false promise, hasn't it? Have those gangs been smashed? No. Has everyone been deported? No. Oh, they might brag that they've deported thousands of people, but that's a drop in the ocean compared to the number of people who are still sitting there on wait lists waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. They said they were going to shut down the migrant hotels, where they might be shutting down some. But the solution to that problem, I think, is even worse, which is putting people into private housing in and around the country and planting them into neighbourhoods without any form of checking what they're doing, how they're going about their business, whether they're coming or going. A report out just the other day showed that 40% of workers at Deliveroo could well be people working illegally. I mean, this is just, it goes on and on and on. And every time he comes up with some sort of solution, it falls apart within a matter of moments. Let's remind ourselves, first of all, of what happened when he said, I know, I've got a great idea. I've nicked it off Georgia Maloney. We're going to send people awaiting being processed to somewhere like Albania. And he actually went to do a big old press conference with Edi Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister. This is what happened.
Yes, we are in talks with a number of countries about return hubs. And I see them as a really important innovation. And that is consistent with the work that we've done in relation to UK-Albania reduction in numbers.
I have been very clear since day one when we started this process with Italy that this was a one-off with Italy.
You're literally doing a press conference with the guy and you've not even sorted out a deal with him personally. What a load of ineptitude. Well, apparently he's about to face humiliation again because he came out of another flagship policy, a one-in, one-out migrant deal with France, which he thinks that the Prime Minister was going to have this summit with France. So it's happening this week. Oh, that's it. Little Emmanuel Macron, Petit Napoleon, is coming to town. He's going to have the full royal carriage ride. The Mall is festooned with the tricolour. And the Prime Minister was going to use all of this sort of, cozying up and pomp and ceremony to persuade Macron to sign up to a deal where we will send one person who's come from the Channel illegally to France in return for taking somebody who has legally applied from France to come to the UK. FYI, if you can't add up, Sir Keir Starmer, one in, one out means sort of a net zero change with the level of people coming to this country. I hope you realise that. It's not actually going to bring the numbers down, is it, Sunshine? Well, don't you worry, because it seems to me that that is not going to happen. Anyway, Whitehall sources have now played down the prospect of a breakthrough this week, following an intervention by the European Commission. Even Macron himself had said repeatedly, you can't do a deal with France alone, you can only do a deal with the whole of the EU. Let's remember that this is the man who wanted to become basically the president of the EU. Then when the UK left the EU, he wanted to set up a sort of little separate EU with certain countries that Britain could be a part of. He's the pin-up of the EU, is our little mate Emmanuel. So this idea that you could sort of, you know, circumvent the dealings of Brussels and go straight to the source of the problem was for the birds all along. Let's speak to Dr. Mike Jones, political commentator, scientist and migration expert. I mean, I just think this is a stupid idea anyway, this one in, one out. Somebody who's crossed the Channel legally gets sent to France and then, you know, instead we'll have application centres in France itself where they can come over legally. Why would the French agree to that? I don't understand what's in it for France.
There's very little in it for France themselves because it creates massive political problems for them, particularly with the Prime Minister and his rather precarious political situation at the moment. I think Macron is trying to reach out to Keir Starmer. Obviously, Starmer is very much aligned with the EU project, and I think Macron is showing a certain amount of solidarity, but there's very little in this for France itself. I think the French may be trying to have their cake and eat it. They'll want to offload some of their illegal migrants to the UK themselves and possibly return the illegal migrants that they receive to the sort of landing countries such as, you know, Italy or Greece. So, and that's obviously why there's massive tension within the European Commission at this point in time.
I mean, I think it was it the sort of mayor of Calais, or actually, no, it might have been one of the ministers in Macron's cabinet, basically pointed the finger at Britain, saying, you know, the problem is that you guys, you're El Dorado for migrants. You give them a house, you give them a hotel. They're sitting in Calais going, we want to go over to Britain because we get 4-star accommodation, we get a free phone, we get football tickets, driving lessons, pocket money, all-inclusive accommodation. And you have to agree with him because in Calais, they're not getting all that stuff. They're in temporary encampments. And so there is this pull factor which weighs heavily on France because as long as they think they might be able to get a boat over to Calais, they're going to traipse through Europe and end up in Calais. So it would be in the French interest, one would think, to start scuppering the passage of migrants across the Channel at the very least, in the hope that actually it might stop the exodus throughout Europe to land on the French coastline. And yet what we find out is the scale of the French cops' ineptitude has been laid bare. Nearly 4 times more migrants have come to the UK than they've managed to stop. What's going on here? Is this just the scale of the problem is so big that with all the will in the world, the gendarmerie and the police in France can do very little to prevent it, especially when the French unions are saying don't get their loafers wet, don't let them walk into the shallows of the water, although I understand that that is now potentially being reversed? Or is it that there's a sort of laissez-faire attitude, a sort of it suits us a little bit not to stop this problem?
Scale is definitely a problem there. You're spot on about that, Alex. The second problem, though, is that the French don't want to be a holding a pen for illegal migrants who don't want to be in France but want to make their way to the UK, because that will create a massive political difficulties within France itself. I mean, to be fair, the French are changing their maritime laws. They've sort of trialled this sort of small boats puncture scheme, although the French have bizarrely said that this is a one-off incident. It's not going to be sort of standard operational procedure.
What? Why?
I know that's really concerning. I thought this was part of a new sort of operational strategy, but the French may not actually puncture these dinghies as a sort of first course of action, and I think that's really, really concerning. If they do puncture them, I think that's a bit of a game changer, personally. But the French may not actually go down that line. I saw a quote in the Daily Mail on this, and they said they only punctured them because they were concerned about the sort of motorization of the vehicle itself, and it wasn't functioning properly. Very, very bizarre.
To me, this is bizarre because, look, I'm not a genius. I'm not a migration expert. I don't fully understand how all of this works. But what is clear to me, we've got pictures on the screen at the moment of scenes that I assume are near the dunes of Calais. Last year I was in France and I went over by ferry and I went back by ferry and I actually took a wrong turning and ended up driving my car around Calais and was absolutely aghast at what I saw there. I mean, the number of migrants all waiting to try and get over to Britain is breathtaking. And surely the greatest way to prevent that happening, prevent these people flocking into France and amassing along the French coastline, is to prove to them once and for all that they won't be able to get on a boat. So you'd imagine getting out the old scissors and stabbing a few of those dinghies is the best way of going about that.
Yeah, that's the logical way of viewing it. But the problem is politics doesn't function according to that logic. It's, the logic of politics is not in my term in office, NIMTO. And the long-term solution is basically to stop these people from arriving in the UK. That reduces the pull factor. Fewer illegal migrants move into France, concomitantly as a result of that. But democratic politics is focused around electoral cycles. So if France becomes a holding pen for illegal immigrants, then the Macron government is going to face huge problems from, the Front National and the centre-right parties, and it's going to create instability. So that's the problem here. And ultimately, France is quite a nationalistic country. It's a member of the EU, which might sound a bit contradictory, but they're very patriotic and they're massive immigration skeptics. And, the French political elites, they want to cooperate with the UK, but they don't want to cooperate too much. So they don't want their actions to be too effective, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, as someone who's very, very familiar with France, indeed, I'd say that the state of France when it comes to immigration, the balkanisation of communities, is actually worse in metropolitan France than it is in Britain, as hard as that may be to believe. And so I wonder whether sort of keeping that spigot slightly open and venting off a little bit of pressure across the channel might suit them, although I do think it's counterproductive. Now, you remember that guy who came over with a big old gun tattooed on his face? His name was Sadiq Khan, otherwise known as Afghan Pazer or something, some funny name. He had that Kalashnikov on his face and he threatened murder. Pacer. He provoked outrage last year when he put videos online of his trip over to the UK in a small boat. But before he did that, he was sitting there like a sort of gangster over in Calais, making videos like, bam, 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 I'm going to kill Nigel Farage and I'm going to come over to Britain. Let's, rather than me doing an impersonation, which is always going to be ridiculous, let's have a little watch of this geezer.
You not know me. I gonna come to England. I gonna pop, mother. Pasa, man, there's mother pasa. Every country know me, Vamaya, mother pasa. I'm TikToker, I'm not gang, I'm not mafia. I'm mafia's papa, mother pasa, man. Rais Montana.
Well, he's a nice gentleman, isn't he? I'm sure we welcomed him with open arms because he's exactly the sort of nuclear scientist that so culturally enriches our society. Thankfully, though, we did welcome him with open arms and put him straight in the nick. But ridiculously, that little TikToker influencer with the Kalashnikov on his face is still broadcasting to his adoring fans on TikTok from HMP Wandsworth. What on earth is going on, Mike?
Well, he's just a scumbag. He's totally degenerate. Why is he even in prison? He should be deported straight away, 24, 48 hours. He should be sent back to his country of origin. He has a Kalashnikov tattooed on his face. He's issuing death threats. And he's posting these bizarre TikTok videos of himself in prison, banging his head against the door, feeding birds outside of his video, and, you know, being all robust in terms of his threats to British politicians. It's just disgusting, and it shows the level of almost pathological altruism here in the UK, that we're prepared to harbour people that pose a direct and significant threat to national security in our prisons. He should be returned to his country of origin. You know, if we don't have a returns agreement with that country, then why isn't the UK government using leverage, visa bans, international aid cuts?
It's a problem here, though. Look, I was going to ask you about this next. Can we actually return people to Afghanistan? Because that means signing up to some sort of agreement with the Taliban.
Yeah, that is unfortunately one avenue you would have to go down. I mean, to have a returns agreement with Afghanistan, you would have to give them a certain amount of diplomatic recognition. And, you know, obviously that's quite an uncomfortable thing, because the way the Taliban treat women there is, you know, pretty disgusting. But another option would be to have a third safe country agreement. Rwanda, for example.
Oh, it'd go down very well in Kigali, I'm sure. The likes of the Paul Kagame government are probably well looking forward to having him there. But look, I agree with you. I don't understand why, when these people come across who, like him, are clearly just, you know, scumbags, to use your word, I fully endorse it. I don't understand why we're not like, right, go and do some hard labour. Why we're like, oh, yeah, sit in a prison cell, have a PlayStation, use your phone, carry on broadcasting on TikTok. Makes a mockery of the entire system.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my view is they should be deported as soon as possible. We need to reopen detention centres. You know, we've got one in Haslam, one in Campsfield House. Just like reopen them. You've got a lot of capacity there that could be added instantly. You don't need any sort of Ascension Island. You know, you don't need to build 10 cities on British overseas territories. We've got actual facilities there that we can reopen, keep them locked in there, and start negotiating with foreign countries. You know, Donald Trump is doing this. He's got his own, you know, sort of blacklist. He's banning visas from countries that will not cooperate with him on illegal immigration. Use leverage, international aid, remittances. That's a huge one. That is the topic that isn't discussed by anyone in the media. We need taxes on remittances, maybe even sanctions, where we stop people transferring money back to their country of origin, because the reason they won't accept illegal immigration is because of the money that's sent back from the communities here to their country of origin. We need to start using leverage, Trump-style diplomacy techniques, total visa bans, which will annoy the middle class in their country, and cuts in international aid. You know, we need to get tough, but we're not being tough because we have a political class that's completely out of touch with reality and is living in the past. But that's the way it is.
Oh, we have a media as well, by and large, that beatify people like that horrible creature. Mike, thank you ever so much for coming on the show. We're going to take a short breather now, but when I come back, it's time for you to give me your thoughts on anything we've been discussing today. The number to call is 0344 499 1000. It's your normal network rate. You can use that number as well to send me a message on WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number to send a text message. You've got to write the word talk before your message. I'm back after this.
Ed Davey, who we haven't seen out and about for ages, and doesn't seem to speak out about very much, was so concerned about this that he was demanding that there was some kind of, national emergency. The heat wave lasted 2 days. It was Monday, it was Tuesday. Yeah, it was a bit hot, and it wasn't very nice on the tube. But, there are parts of Britain where people were getting in touch with me going, it's pouring with rain here.
Also,
it's about 15 degrees. Bring it on. Let's have some global warming.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello and welcome back to the show, and welcome also to the show some of our callers. The phone lines are going pretty rampantly. It's like being in some sort of direct line call centre at the moment. I wish I had one of those little, microphones, headsets like, hello, Alex speaking. Let's speak to James, who is in London. Good afternoon, James.
Good afternoon, Alex.
What is on your mind? What thoughts do you wish to share?
Well, the thoughts I'd wish to share, Alex, is our disgraceful Chancellor, Miss Reeves, and our illegitimate Prime Minister, Mr. Starmer, when they come out with this nonsense that we're going to have to do a wealth tax. What they actually mean, it's not a wealth tax, because I can't see him taxing his buddies like Lord Ali. What it is he'll be taxing big corporations, such will then pass on the prices to us normal muggles, and it'll be us morons yet again. They'll be hit in the pocket because I'm sick and tired of their lies.
Well, you are right that by and large, actually, taxing people with £10 million worth of assets, isn't it? In this day and age in a capital city like London, we're not talking about the highest of high flyers at all. We're talking about the sort of middle rump of people who've done OK in life, bought property at the right time, might run a small business. It's hardly sort of going after the sort of big fintech giants with all their, deep pockets. But, either way, taxing wealthy people, as appealing as it sounds, is playground politics, isn't it? It doesn't actually end up bringing more money to the government. It ends up scaring away people who otherwise are the biggest donors to the Treasury.
Absolutely. Big business will then hence not come here, and then what we'll get is the middle-class morons that voted in their droves for the Labour Party are then going to find out what tax is, because they will be next.
Yeah, they will be next. I couldn't agree with you more. You've summed it up beautifully, James. Thank you ever so much for your call. Let's stick with our London audience, shall we, and speak to Ricky. Good afternoon, Ricky.
Hello, Alex. How are you? Right.
I thought you were going to say hello, darling, then, and then stopped yourself at the last minute.
I forgot.
No, you can do that. I like it. We're not some sort of,
Your rant about Sadiq Khan, I hope they cut it out and make it like an independent YouTube vlog. I hope they do that and it gets a wider audience. I really do.
My producer Finn has just said to me in my ear, we already have. He's on it.
Oh, fantastic. A few points I want to make. Quick one on the wealth tax. There's already a wealth tax just for the well-off people. I own a second home. I have to pay double council tax on that now, 100% premium. They're weaponising the tax system. I won't go into why I've got a second home and all that because it's a long story. I haven't got time for that. Basically, so what we currently have, we have an imposter government. This is the government that wasn't voted in. This is not the government that the Labour. I didn't vote Labour. This is not the government that the Labour voters voted in. They are imposters, and we can all go on about how bad they are and what kind of dire consequences we're facing. But we face another 4 years of these. So I'm thinking, what can we do to get rid of them? Will it come to the point, Alex, whereby we would have to, without the opposite political parties, to form some kind of temporary alliance to maybe call a national strike to mobilise the population, a national strike, when things are getting so bad because they are so dire. That I've never known in my history, I'm 60, to be so fearful. And so I watch the TV and I'm bewildered, like a lot of your audience, of what is going on. David Lammy's just given away £100 million to Syria.
I know, it's bonkers.
The country's on its knees. The country's on its knees, Alex, and they're giving away all this money. It's just actually crazy. So
I hate to tell you this. When you say what can be done, there are various sort of smart Alex who, go about and do political commentary and say, well, he's going to be gone. He's not going to get to the end of 4 years. Well, the Labour Party in big trouble. Look at what a mess they're in. Look how catastrophic their polling is. They're not going to survive. And every time I ask people, OK, how? Why? What is the mechanism that we can use to dispatch of this government? The answer is there isn't one, because the Labour Party, love it or loathe it, have a very big majority. You'd be requiring all of those MPs to join a vote of no confidence, to essentially be the turkeys that voted for Christmas and banish themselves from a political career, because a lot of them will know that when it comes to the end of their tenure in 2029, they're not going to be elected back in. So why would they wish to foreshorten that particular exercise? Even the Labour Party getting rid of Starmer himself and replacing him is very difficult to do when you look at the constitution of the Labour Party and how it operates. And also, be careful of what you wish for, because if Starmer does go, I would hate to think what might come up in his wake as our new Prime Minister. I frankly don't know, unless we hit some massive national crisis and you sort of level the concept that could we have a nationwide strike. The problem is this, Ricky. The people who love striking are the left. You know, when they want more money for public services, it's actually the people like, the people who are members of Unison who like striking. And yes, they might want to get rid of Sir Keir Starmer because they want someone even more extreme socialist in lieu. Most ordinary Brits don't do that.
Alex, the thing is, the left, they strike, but the fact is they get their way. Imagine a national strike. The left, the unions, the train drivers and all that, they strike, they get their way. Imagine, take those strikes and multiply them by 100. The country comes to a standstill. You get Conservatives reform. We're talking, the country's in such a bad way. So something drastic has to be done.
I'm fairly certain. Look, Ricky, I share your desperation at the circumstances. I share your feelings about how dangerous his government might be over the next 4 years if it can't get its act together and get rid of some of the socialist policies it's put in place. I share your feelings totally. The problem is, as a broadcaster, if I sort of back your calls for a national strike, I could be in trouble. So I'm not going to do that. But listen, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this totally agree that we do sort of look upon the fact it's only been 1 year and we've got to somehow limp to the finish line in 2029 in the hope that we might actually get, for the first time in a long time, a good government. And I think a lot of people are just feeling extremely despondent about that. And maybe desperate times do call for desperate measures, but I can't be one, unfortunately, to endorse such things, or I might be out of a job. Ricky, thank you ever so much for your call. Now, talking about desperate measures, we're supposed to be getting rid of all these DEI muppets in the same way that America's doing it, because what do they do apart from divide us, apart from making things a lot worse, cost us valuable money and push really crazy cultural Marxist principles that just should not be welcome in Britain? No. Good old Big Angela Rayner has decided that with her workers' rights bill, she wants to introduce people to police chit-chat, humour, conversations, water cooler gossip, the things that people might say in a pub that a bar staff member might be offended by. I mean, talk about the death of free speech. Well, we will after this break.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I don't know, guys and gals, if this is being overplayed, but apparently with the slew of regulations that's going to come in Angela Rayner's workers' rights bill, she wants to roll out even more diversity officers in the workplace whose job would be to ensure that nothing harmful or distressing gets said within the hearing of someone who may be harmed or distressed by it. What does that even mean? Who is the arbiter of what is harmful and distressing? What is that? I mean, it's worse than living under the auspices of the Stasi, this nonsense. Let's speak now to Alan Miller, co-founder of the brilliant Together Declaration. I mean, that's me done for, Alan, except I actually work with super sound people and we have all sorts of banter during the advert breaks, which if this was played out commercially, we'd be in huge trouble. But if they wanted to trot off to HR and say, you never guess what Alex said during that commercial, I could find myself being thrown out of a building faster than a Lord knows what. But for other people, this is potentially going to become a real threat.
It's a terrible situation, Alex. We've already seen since 2021 there has been a 45% increase in tribunals around this specific issue of banter. So the overly monitoring and legalising the relationships between people in the workplace because of things that people say. And they will say, Angela Rayner and this government, well, it's not really about free speech, it's explicitly about harassment. But of course, when you start saying a woman is a woman, or you believe in other things and you say those things, people then say, well, words are violence and that's distressing and harmful and that's harassment. And we've seen it play out in lots of ways. We saw it this weekend, both in Leeds and in London. We saw a young man called Monty arrested because he had a placard saying trans equals mental illness. Now, people may agree or disagree. The Cash report said some things, but the police, who've got some of these initiatives already at Hendon Training College around DEI and ESG, arrested him for having that placard. We've seen consistently a situation where there's a two-tier approach to what people can and can't say. You're allowed to say some things. They can be very, very insulting to the state, to Britain, to our institutions, to women, to all sorts of people. But if you say other things, then the good and the great, the technocrats who love DEI, will say that's being harmful or prejudiced or racist. You know, if you have a conversation, let's imagine around the water cooler, that you think too many people are coming in the country, is that then being racist? And this problem that you have a situation where increasingly lawyers get involved in our relationships and then taxpayers pick up the bill, less working time, it puts enormous pressure on businesses who are going to be worried about the fact they'll be held accountable. If you own a bar and people come in and say some things, and let's be honest, people say all sorts of things in a bar, and long may that live. But now if a security guard or someone hears you saying something or someone complains, you can have your license put under pressure. And in the same way, in any kind of SME, and we should remember, Alex, that in Britain, small and medium-sized enterprises are the vast composition of the businesses in Britain. They can't afford this sort of thing. We're having an exodus of millionaires that are leaving the country, tens of thousands of them, people going to Dubai and Portugal. And this is, on the one hand, an Orwellian Brave New World moment where you're not even allowed to think certain things. You're certainly not allowed to say them. We have to unthink. We have to self-censor until we stop saying things. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in most workplaces, Alex, saying, I wouldn't, with these conversations. The people will go, that's outrageous. It's utterly unacceptable. Being polite, being civil, we just have some ideas that, you know, if one happens to think, look, people have different views about abortion and right, you know, pro-life or pro-abortion, but if you mention something, you say something, or even if you've watched a TV show and you chat to your friend about it at work, all of a sudden, all of those areas are policed, and it's terrifying, right? We often point to China and other places to say, look what's going on, but we're having it here. And that's why at Together and a Together Declaration, we've got the Digital Bill of Rights at the moment, because we're saying that from the Online Safety Act to debanking, to the fact that people are being tracked constantly. We don't want a social credit system, right? We don't think it's too concerning to say, look, too dramatic to say, look at what's happened already in the last 5 years. Look at what's happened around Southport, two-tier justice and policing, people imprisoned for social media posts, some not imprisoned for all sorts of violent acts. And we've not got something that, see, even if it was without fear or favour, that police should be, and it's not at the moment, even if it was that, it would still be an encroachment that's too far. We've seen Scotland's got the Hate Crime Act, right? The Hate Crime Act, where if you say something at home now, you could be arrested for that. We need to all, I'd really encourage your viewers to get involved with Together, and togetherdeclaration.org, and say, we must have our liberty and freedom and privacy. Those, by the way, when everyone talks about the far right, that if you like free speech now it's far right, that our grandparents fought actual Nazis.
This is it. They gaslight us. They gaslight us because, actually, if you wanted to think of what the far right is, the concept of right wing is a small state and more freedom. So if you're going to go even further down the spectrum on that, you actually get to libertarianism, where people can do what they like. It's the far left who censor. And, I don't want to turn this into some sort of gender war. But the point is this, with regards to the young man who got arrested with, with the trans flag saying this is mental illness, last time I checked, dysphoria was a psychological condition, right?
Absolutely,
so it seems to me that that's fact. But when you talk about people being thrown out of pubs for unpopular beliefs, I've seen a lot of women from organisations such as Let Women Speak, who might have congregated in a pub after a demonstration, being the ones who are forced out. And a lot of this woke stuff, a lot of the culture wars, the end victim often tends to be a woman, and I'll explain why. When you have people worried about male rapists going into female prisons, it is to protect women. When you're worried about the sort of overhyping of gender dysphoria and puberty blockers and top surgery, this is to stop kids being mutilated. And we know that 75% of teens reporting to gender clinics at one point were little girls, when actually gender dysphoria previously in history has predominantly been a male condition. When we talk about the riots after Southport, it was because it was little girls being massacred by terrorists, as it was when they targeted the Ariana Grande concert. When we talk about grooming gangs, guess what? It's little girls being raped. In the culture wars, this is largely about people standing up and saying we cannot allow these sadistic, warped attitudes and ideas and neo-ideologies and newborn religions to take hold in this country, because it actually imperils girls. Now, I managed to live in an era during the point where, the sort of ladette culture where girls were as good as guys, girl power, you could drink a pint of lager. 90s was like peak civilization. I feel we've kind of gone back to an era now that's pre-suffragette.
Yeah, well, we've got a very insulting attitude towards it, and and this is partly the speech codes as well. It's presented as though, like, often, poor women shrinking violence, they couldn't possibly listen to certain things, but actually many of the things you said you're bang on about. And we should remember that it's been women, again, brave women, the nurses that have had to sue their unions to not have someone who's, a man going into a female toilet, a trans person. We've seen a situation where a nurse was called the N-word because of what she said, and she's had to sue her own union. And part of what this legislation is going to mean is that unions get far more encroaching opportunities in the workplace, which consistently is dominated by a lot of this diversity, equality and inclusion. And they sound like nice words, but what they end up doing is fragmenting us. Our whole the things that are so great about Britain, the things that we've won through the Enlightenment, through the Renaissance, liberty, freedom, privacy, rights, they're universal things. They're not about what colour we are or whether we're Christian or anything else. But it is a Christian country, or at least it's meant to be. And it is the case that we should have a shared legacy. And what happens is we have a situation where it increasingly encourages people to firstly have legal transactional relationships where they prosecute one another, to not be robust and resilient and say, well, you know what? I disagree, I'm Tottenham or I'm West Ham. I think this, you think that, that's work. We have a laugh, we have a bit of banter. The terrifying thing about all of this is that now people end up self-censoring. It's what the intention is. I think this but I'm not going to say that. It's like when they said there were shy Tories, and then they were so surprised about Brexit.
I think it goes even further than that. You know, like, I agree. It is. We're already in prison, all of us, because we're in the prison of our minds. So we don't only just self-censor, that there are some of us thinking, gosh, I have a feeling that this might actually be true, but I don't want to say it out loud. There's also a cohort of people out there who have swallowed all of this left-wing nonsense so wholeheartedly that they don't even think it. They don't even think it. I know plenty of especially middle-class women, I ain't picking on them, but it's true, who sign up to all this refugees welcome, trans lives matter stuff because they haven't even questioned it or analysed it. Reality is so far away, it's a dot on the horizon to these people.
And that's why it's so important, Alex, that I think people get involved in the campaign. You should definitely come to us at togetherdeclaration.org. It's on everything. It's on cash. It's on tracking with central bank digital currency. It's on facial surveillance. They say, and this is the thing for us to be aware of as well, they say it's to stop fraud or stop crime or protect borders or to stop the... But we've seen CCTV everywhere, and yet all these things you're describing still happen.
Right.
We know that the boats are not going to get stopped by us having tracking digital ID. It will be us in Britain, the citizens that will have it done on us. And it's really important that we remind people of the legacy, of our provenance, of our history, of freedoms and liberty and rights that we've all have a duty to uphold and defend, and to say the difficult things, to have courage and to say them in our workplaces to one another as friends, but also to our neighbours, and to reject these attempts to shut down speech, to make us all be automatons. It's unhuman, it's unfair, unnecessary, and we need to challenge and stop it together.
Totally agree. Alan, you are such a hero of mine. What you do is exceptional and so important. Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration. Now, if you're a woman like me, or even a man, frankly speaking, who's very exercised about some of the things that I'm talking about today, the culture wars that seem to disproportionately impact upon women, whether we're talking about rape gangs, whether we're talking about the trans stuff where creepy men can get inside brownie guides' tents, whether we're talking about silencing us over the worry about Islamism and their misogynistic medieval attitudes towards women, I would recommend you go on to YouTube or go on to Spotify at some point tonight or in the morning and you play Glynis Johns singing Sister Suffragette in Mary Poppins. Just play it, sing it out loud. We're soldiers in petticoats, shoulder to shoulder for women's votes. OK? That song is an absolute banger. I love it. OK, right, we're going to take an advert break now, but don't go anywhere because when I come back, it's time for your calls and your messages. There's so many messages for me to get through. But if you want to squeeze in one more, this is your last opportunity. WhatsApp 03444991000, or indeed, that is the number also to call if you want to be patched through to the studio. 87222 is the number to text. Right, talk before your message.
most of the Labour MPs voted to prescribe them under the Terrorism Act of 2000. And it goes further, of course, than vandalism, doesn't it, Mike? They sabotage, that's the word I would use, sabotage 2 RAF aircraft to the point of £7 million. But not only did they sabotage them, this is at a time when we're all manner of global conflicts and threats around us. And so to take away the capability from our Royal Air Force, it is an act of terrorism, in my view.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
All right there, welcome back. Let's rattle through some messages, shall we? Hi, Alex. 10 years ago in my job, we used to get to work early to sit around and having a laugh. We now don't because there's no messing around or banter. We're all worried about getting reported. One guy lost their job and I've been reported to HR. It's not fun. You know, the whole point of going to work is to try and enjoy yourself because it makes up about 90% of your waking life, doesn't it? As if you can't have a laugh, if you're not going to have a gossip, if you feel afraid to share some humour or some comedy with your colleagues, then you're going to be blimmin' miserable. Maybe this is why there's a mental health crisis in Britain and so few people are actually in the workplace and sitting under slankets. It's the only place they feel safe to make a quip or two. Honestly, I'll tell you what, my days are numbered, aren't they? Like, 4 more years in this Labour government, I'm going to end up in the Tower of London. But don't you worry, my team in the gallery have already reassured me they'll still make me cups of tea and hand them through the bars. Hi, Alex. My lover, I love that. When I was a kid, my granddad used to say one thing to me, one thing which has set me up for life. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That has been an adage told to school children since time immemorial. And yet, somehow, that very sensible piece of sage advice has been thrown in the dustbin of history. This soppy new lot could learn a lot from that. God help the next generations. Thank goodness I'm 45 and I had the best decades in which to grow up from childhood to adulthood. We don't know how well we had it. You'll feel the same, you young whippersnapper. Love your sausage. I'll tell you what, Aid, I'm about 3 years younger than you, mate. I know, I look like a fount of eternal youth, but I'm also in my 40s. I remember the days before mobile phones, before the mental illness that is social media. Oh yeah, I remember the days of dial-up modems, of actually putting things on a floppy disk, on submitting essays at university on paper that I had typed out. I remember Encarta. Do you remember Encarta, that CD-ROM? Tech Op's nodding. He's the only person behind that glass who knows what I'm talking about because the rest of them haven't even hit puberty. 10 to 20 years from now, they're guaranteed they'll be locking people up for tweets from 20 years ago. I'll already be in there, don't you worry. I'll start a knitting group in prison. Free speech is dead and blasphemy laws are coming. We really do live in a two-tier society. The blasphemy laws really worries me. When that comes in place, honestly, I kind of think that I've got to go. I've got to get out because I am someone who wants to stand up and protect women and girls. It means everything to me. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care what fate has in store for me. If I am standing up for the safety of innocent girls and the integrity of women, it is worth it. So when that legislation comes in, I'm in trouble deep, aren't I? Keep it up, Alex. You're covering a lot of ground today, says Michael in Norwich. Probably the best show you've ever done. Really? You think? Definitely wound up. I'm 63 and this is the first time I've been scared about my future and that of my sons in 20 years, says Deb. Yeah, no, do you know, seriously, when I was a teenager, when I was at university, even when I started out life as a journalist, I never thought I'd be living in a country that actually frightens me as well, that feels as dystopian as it is. Loads of you listening to this must feel like that. That even even sort of 5 years ago, it wasn't like this, was it? We still had comedy on TV. We still had sketch shows. We still had the ability to laugh. We still sort of felt that the freedoms of the West and the stuff that glues us together was going to last forever, that it was immutable, that it wasn't under threat, because that would be just wild and wacky to suggest that it could be. And then fast forward the clock and it's like, whoa. And then the thing is, you go, whoa, but then in another year's time, it's going to be even worse. If the Islamophobia legislation comes in, if the banter police are in the workplace, we're just heading to hell in a handcart. Vince says, why have an agreement to send migrants back to France? We've not got an agreement to take them or let them into the UK illegally. Just put them on a plane back to their countries. Simple. I'll tell you what, not that I'm advocating this as a particular method, but in most other countries of the world, if you look at what happens if you enter that country illegally without a visa, you're certainly not given a hotel, is all I can say. Various countries have a different level of stringency when it comes to trying to prevent people from shacking up without invitation. It definitely is not as weak as ours. Let's speak now to Danny, who's in Liverpool. Hello there, Danny.
Hiya, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you, my love?
I'm good, yeah. I was just listening to the thing about this wealth tax, and you know what? I've been listening to the news and the radio this last few months, and it just does my head in. All the government want to do is tax more, and attack the wealthy, and they'll just leave the country and go, like you say, to Dubai and places like that. How about the clowns who are in charge learn how to manage the money they've already got? There's enough money already in the system. It just needs managing proper.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing, I agree with you. We're a G7 nation, right? There's got to be some cash money floating around to pay for things, and we seem to be paying for all sorts of mental things, like this Motability scheme, like people who need a free car because they can't have a poo. I mean, I honestly feel with this government is it's operating in like a photo negative. Everything that it should not be doing becomes policy, and everything it should be doing, it seems to outlaw and demonise. It's like, whether it's free speech, oh, well, let's get rid of that, let's have some banter police. Whether it's sorting out the economy, I know, instead of growing it, let's throw in even more regulation and bureaucracy and red tape. And then when it comes to actually making sure that businesses can set up shop or we attract foreign direct investment, we scare them off because our energy bills are so crazy because Ed Zero just wants to put windmills everywhere, and this lot just keep whacking taxes on employers. It's like they've got a sort of roadmap to disaster that they're following.
It's crazy. It's not just this government. It's the previous government. It's governments in general. It's like none of them have actually run a business. They've not a clue about cash flow, and you spend what you can spend. But we just seem to be borrowing, and putting the country into more and more debt.
Yep.
Yeah. They want to, they want to learn how to run a business. They couldn't even run a bath, these lot.
No, they couldn't. I'll tell you what, I totally agree. That was Danny in Liverpool. Thank you very much. And let's hand over now to Mr. Peter Cardwell.
The banter police has arrived.
Are you the banter police?
I'm the banter police.
Oh my God,
yes.
I'm going to get under the desk.
You're cowering in fear as well, you might. On a more serious note, we're going to be talking about the dentist fined 150 grand for keeping patients' teeth too healthy. The dental system in this country, the dental desert, it's completely out of control. But what I'm glad is that someone's on the case. The head of the College of Policing, he knows, he's got a nose for crime. He knows that the smell of cannabis is a sign of crime.
And yet Sadiq Khan is the one who's
he wants to legalise it.
He wants to legalise it because it disproportionately affects minority communities.
Maybe if they stop smoking it, maybe that would be a